Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, that it enjoy.
Maintain the attitude. Well, that worked better than I hoped. He even gave me special effects and all. Taka thought as he glared at the now captured Kurogiri hovering before him, struggling under his aura's pressure. He didn't quite remember every detail of how things had played out in the show, but he had to admit, using a cupule of darkness to teleport everyone away. It was the perfect setup for a light that pierces the insurmountable darkness moment. He sure reaped quite a lot of aura with that move. About 200 in one go, and probably more later. Taka thought, smirking behind his mask. And aura wasn't the only thing he had managed to harvest there. He also got to try wrapping it around his classmates' bodies to prevent the mist from touching them. Something he hadn't had the chance to do so far, since he acted alone most of the time. Now he was more ready for similar situations in the future, and it had also sparked a new idea about his aura's still intact applications. A very interesting idea. But more on that later. I need to focus on the matter at hand. Taka shook his head briefly. Pushing the thought aside, Taka swept his gaze briefly over his classmates. They remained behind him, staring in stunned silence at how everything had unfolded, and how the terrifying villain and whatever his plans had been, were stopped in a matter of seconds. But although they were clearly relieved, Taka didn't share much of the sentiment. Too bad they won't get to fight villains today. I'm fairly sure that was a good growing instance for them, even if a bit scary, he sighed inwardly, recalling the fights and the clutch-ups his classmates pulled in the show to beat the villains waiting for them whenever Kurogi had warped them. He had just taken away that chance to experience the real thing and grow as heroes from them. For a moment, faint regret showed on Taka's face. Only to disappear as a sneer escaped his nose. But I suppose I'll make it up to them with some extra training. Canon deviation resolved. At least to his satisfaction, Taka turned his attention back to Kurogiri. Now then, he said calmly, how about we talk about those plans of yours? The villain's glowing eyes narrowed, his voice slipping through the crushing pressure around him. It seems UA's golden eggs are more exceptional than we anticipated. To think I'd meet a quirk that counters mine right here. How troublesome. Are you deaf? Taka's raised hand twitched. In response, the aura constricting Kurogiri's metallic neck brace compressed further, the metal denting inward with a sharp groan. Under this thing, Taka continued coolly, is your physical body, is it not? KGH. Kurogiri's eyes widened slightly as a grunt escaped him, the pressure finally making itself known. Taka's eyes burned brighter, his aura flaring with unmistakable menace. Start talking, he said, if you don't want to become a flattened can. You unfortunately, I cannot. Kurogiri maintained his composure, even through the pain. Is that so? Taka's eyes narrowed, his grip on the metal increased. Kurogiri's breath began to hasten, and the metal compressed further. But even then, he remained silent. Not only that, the villain clearly wasn't hiding his pain. The eye twitches, the groans, the hastened breath, he was suffering. And yet, his eyes never left Taka's. Even as the student's fingers slowly closed, and the metal around Kurogiri's neck screamed under the strain, buckling more with each passing second, the villain never broke eye contact. Not even once showing hesitation in them, nor fear. He wasn't going to talk, even if it meant his death. So, in the end, Taka released his grip. Pretty auratic, he admitted inwardly, nodding in quiet respect. He descended back to the ground, boots touching the floor as his aura relaxed and the pressure dissipated. A huff slipped from his nose. Well, it's not like I expected a different outcome. Kurogiri was already thoroughly brainwashed. Beyond putting on a show, Taka hadn't truly expected him to reveal anything about the League's plans. Not that he needed him to, he already knew mostly everything. But the others didn't know that, so appearances had to be maintained. As for why he wasn't killing Kurogiri, one of, if not the most, troublesome villain around, well, that was because Shigaraki needed this guy with how often he screwed up. Otherwise, he'd be caught before he could even amount to anything. So, leaving the foggy villain running around until Shigaraki and company became worth aura harvesting was the smart move. That, plus the fact that my edginess is just for show. I'm not quite that willing to kill someone just yet, Taka thought grimly. Maybe in the future he'd be willing to take that step with the most unredeemable bunch, but for now, he wasn't about to try his luck on finding out whether he would be a cold-blooded killer or vomit from guilt the instant someone got blasted by him. Maybe he was inviting trouble onto himself by not ending this guy here, but wasn't that the way of the aura farmer? Trouble equals aura, and besides, these guys won't be able to beat me, he thought, glaring at Kurogiri with a smug look. Decision made, and letting out a sneer, Taka turned toward 13, who had been watching the entire exchange in speechless disbelief. It seems he won't talk, Taka said, snapping her out of her thoughts. You, 13 hesitated, then exhaled softly. I think Aizawa mentioned you. You really are as troublesome as he said, huh? What's that supposed to mean? Taka raised an eyebrow. After a brief nod of thanks, 13 turned back to Kurogiri, uncertainty creeping into her voice. Can you keep him restrained? So long as I want, Taka replied calmly, confidence filling his tone, he won't be moving. Nodding, 13 turned and swept her gaze across the main plaza, her eyes narrowing as she spotted Aizawa still locked in combat with the horde of villains below. We should evacuate immediately and call in the other heroes quickly. Everyone, let's get on the move. She turned to the students, gesturing firmly toward the exit. They obeyed, nodding as they started moving. 13 was about to follow, when she noticed someone hadn't moved. Takahashi, she turned, tone filled with confusion. Taka stood still, his eyes fixed on the main plaza where Aizawa carved through the villains. Then he turned back to them, his voice calm. You guys go, I'll help the teacher. What? Multiple voices erupted at once. This is not the time to be reckless, Takahashi. 13's tone hardened. We need outside support. There are too many villains, this is far too dangerous for mere students to deal with. No, the single word landed heavily. Oi, Takahashi, don't be an idiot, Jiro stepped forward. I know you're strong, but that's at least 50 villains down there. That's too much even for you. Kirishima swallowed. Why, man, this isn't the time to show off. We need to get All Might. He can handle this. You're strong, Taka, but this is too much, even for you, Tsuyu said, worry clear on her face. Taka didn't blink. By the time All Might or anyone else gets here, he said evenly, Aizawa-sensei will be dead. A chill ran through the group. What are you talking about? Sato protested. He's holding his ground. We're just slowing things down by staying here. Yes, Takahashi-san, Iida snapped. This is not the moment to prove yourself. Takahashi-san, please. Yaoyorozu stepped forward, too. But Taka's next words pulled everyone into silence. You still don't get it? Taka asked, his tone almost amused, shooting them a look. They came here to kill All Might. Those villains down there are numerous, sure, but they're weaklings. Anyone capable of and with the influence to gather this many people should know that, regardless of numbers, weaklings wouldn't even be able to scratch All Might. Todoroki's eyes narrowed. So you're saying they have something else? Taka nodded. And whatever that is, he continued, his tone turning ominous, Aizawa-sensei won't be able to hold out against it. He paused, turning his gaze toward Kurogiri. Isn't that right? The villain didn't answer, but he didn't need to. There was no fear in his glowing eyes. Not even after being captured. That alone was enough to unsettle the group. Even 13 hesitated. Still, Kaminari said shakily, if they really have something to deal with All Might, we can't handle that ourselves. Only All Might and the others should. Aargh. Before he could continue, however, Aizawa's scream tore through the air, reaching them even from the distance between the main plaza and here. Every head snapped back toward the battlefield. And this time, the scene had changed completely. Where moments ago Aizawa had been overwhelming the crowd, now he was pinned to the ground, his body crushed beneath a towering, monstrous figure with obsidian skin and a beak-like maw. Their teacher's arms bent at impossible angles under the monster's grip, pitiful screams coming from the erasure hero. Sensei, shit, what do we do? That was enough to set the class in panic. For once, 13 looked uncertain of what to do as well. But before any of them could even attempt to think of something, Taka began moving. You all leave, and call for help, Taka said, already moving toward the stairs leading down to the plaza. I'll stay. Protests erupted behind him, from teacher and students alike. But that hadn't been a suggestion. It was a statement. Whoosh. Taka's aura flared violently. In the next instant, he leapt from the stairs, following the same path Aizawa had taken earlier, and skipping the stairs entirely. Boom. His descent was like a falling comet of crimson. The ground detonated as his feet slammed into the plaza. His arrival rang out like a gong, freezing the battlefield in an instant. The villains who had been rushing toward the Naurs-trained Aizawa paused, turning their heads in shock, their surging confidence vanishing in an instant the moment they laid their eyes on the figure standing there. Through the pain of being pinned down, Aizawa's eyes widened. Takahashi, Shigaraki, on the other hand, squinted at the newcomer, his eyes scanning him for a moment before they looked at something else behind the newcomer's shoulder. Ho! Floating behind him, a still restrained Kurogiri struggled. At least, until Taka casually waved a hand and hurled him across the plaza. Thud, uck. A few seconds later, the villain slammed harshly into the ground near Shigaraki, skidding a meter or so, before he finally came to a stop. Shigaraki's eyes swept over him briefly, irritation twisting his face. You got captured, Kurogiri. Despite the pain and the tense look Shigaraki was shooting him, Kurogiri showed no fear, he simply reported the details of what had happened as he weakly pushed himself up. Shigaraki Tamura, the plan has failed. I was unable to teleport the students, and they are right now evacuating the facility. It won't be long before external help arrives. For a moment, Shigaraki went utterly silent. Then his fingers rose to his neck. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The pacing and violence of the scratching increased as the seconds passed. Of course, he muttered, voice trembling with rage. Of course you failed at the only thing I asked you to do. One job. One fucking job. His scratching grew violent. Damn it, Kurogiri, if your quirk wasn't gate, I'd have killed you already. Kurogiri remained unmoved, as if the threat meant nothing. Eventually, Shigaraki forced himself to calm down. Whatever. This mission is a failure. His gaze shifted to Taka, who stood calmly at the foot of the stairs. And who might you be? He's the one who prevented me from using my quirk on the students, Kurogiri added, pushing himself upright, although with a little limp. Takahashi, get out of here, arg. From the ground, Aizawa tried to shout, only for Nomu to slam his head back down. Takahashi, huh, Shigaraki's lips curled upward, mockingly. So, a student. He laughed softly, he must think he's the chosen one to drop here, amidst dozens of villains without fear. Seriously, this society has everyone so thoroughly brainwashed. Taking a deep breath, Shigaraki's red eyes landed directly on Taka's own. We've failed our objective, so we should be retreating soon before more annoying pests come to bother us, but since you came all the way down here, I suppose we can leave All Might a little souvenir to remember us and shatter that pride of his while at it. His smile widened, his tone turning sadistic and manic. A dead teacher and a dead student. How does that sound? You're misunderstanding something. Taka's voice cut through the air, calm and absolute. His eyes shone as the aura around him thickened, growing heavier, more oppressive. Ha! Shigaraki tilted his head, then, swoosh. A burst of crimson aura erupted from Taka and slammed into Nomu. The creature was launched backward like a meteor, tearing through the plaza before crashing some meters past the fountain at the center, tearing it apart. Shigaraki looked past his shoulder with a surprised gaze before looking back at their new foe. Then, another surge of that bright crimson aura followed immediately. KGH, you damn troublesome brat, get out of here. Aizawa cursed as his body was lifted gently, carried upward by the aura. Moments later, he was deposited safely above the stairs, where several of Class 1A rushed forward, grabbing their injured teacher and pulling him back with them. Shigaraki stared, disbelief etched across his face. Then Taka spoke again, drawing the villain's attention back to him. From now on, he said, stepping forward, you'll be fighting only me. His aura exploded outward, flaring like a crimson inferno, dominant, overwhelming, unmistakable. The dark silhouette of his suit contrasted sharply against the raging red lights surrounding him. Ha! Shigaraki let out a hollow laugh. Well, aren't you cool? He waved a hand. Immediately, the remaining villains regrouped, forming a defensive barrier between him and Taka. Then, dark swirling portals opened. Kurogiri's eyes narrowed as one gate after another flared to life. Villains who had been waiting across the facility, prepared to ambush scattered students, stepped through, swelling their numbers. Soon, a small army stood against a single student. Let's see if you can maintain that attitude, Shigaraki snorted, then pointed straight at Taka. With that simple command, every remaining villain surged forward, all of them charging straight at him. Taka cracked his neck with calmness before the rushing numbers, a smirk forming beneath his mask. Status page, filled right pointing small triangle strength, 14,000. Filled right pointing small triangle defense, 14,316. Filled right pointing small triangle aura projection, 8,000. Total aura, 36,815 right pointing arrow 35,815, 97, 2%. First clone's aura. 1,002, 8%. Upping his physical stats, Taka stared down the rushing horde. 60, maybe 70 villains. A scene worthy of nightmares for many. That many people rushing at you usually meant certain death. For someone lesser, that is. Without an ounce of fear, Taka took a single step forward. Swoosh. What followed was etched permanently into the memories of everyone watching. Villains, classmates, teachers, all of them stared with awe at what followed. Taka's figure blurred, a trail of crimson light that zigzagged across the army like a ricocheting bullet. Too fast for any eye to properly follow him. And then, thud, in the very next instant, every villain collapsed to the ground, unconscious. After that, a red trail of light lingered in the air, dissipating slowly, the only proof of what had just occurred. Without it, no one could have followed what had transpired or known what Taka had done. But one truth was unmistakable, no matter if they had caught Taka's movements or not. In mere seconds, Taka had crushed an entire army. And standing past the fallen villains, now without anything blocking his path to Shigaraki. Taka stood unbothered. Shigaraki stared at the fallen bodies, disbelief freezing his expression. Then Taka's voice snapped him out of it. Let's see if you can maintain yours. The Nomu, what the hell is this, a surprise subboss? Shigaraki muttered, his face scrunching in growing distaste. His gaze swept over the dozens upon dozens of villains he had recruited for this attack, now all pathetically sprawled across the floor, defeated by a single move. Just when had it all gone wrong? The plan was perfect. He had obtained All Might's class schedule, recruited nearly 100 villains, taken severe precautions to ensure everything went flawlessly. The Nomu, a monster designed to endure all forms of beating, with strength rivaling even that of the top hero, should have battled All Might and overwhelmed him completely, drowning the symbol of peace in despair. And even if that failed, even if that damned hero had somehow found a way to surpass his secret weapon, Kurogiri should have teleported the brats toward the several ambushes he had planted around the facility. Thus, turning them into hostages and forcing All Might into a checkmate. And yet, nothing had gone as expected. All Might hadn't even shown up. Kurogiri failed to warp the students. And then this random kid appeared, and wiped out his entire force in an instant. What kind of bullshit is this? All that preparation, all that planning, ruined by unknown variables in a single moment. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Shigaraki clawed at his neck furiously, the skin already raw and reddened. Then, abruptly, he stopped. His gaze lifted to the sky, empty and drained. This is a failure, an utter failure. There was no denying reality anymore, no trying to save this. His forces were defeated. Kurogiri had failed at his job and apparently was countered by the kid ahead, so he couldn't even play the hostage card anymore. By now, the students, or at least one of them, should have already left the facility. With the villains down, the one jamming communications was probably among the unconscious. Any second now, heroes would swarm the facility. He had to retreat. There was no other option for this. Shigaraki nodded, accepting it. But then, his head snapped back toward Taka, red eyes gleaming with murderous intent. But not before getting rid of the brat who ruined it all. Thud, 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 heavy footsteps echoed behind him. Shigaraki glanced over his shoulder, and grinned. The Nomu stood there, uninjured, unfazed. Its body showed no sign of damage from the earlier blow. He snorted. I was worried you'd found a way to bypass shock absorption, seeing how you sent him flying earlier, but it turns out you only pushed him, huh? A cruel smile twisted his lips as he turned back to Taka. Did you know, brat? This thing is my secret weapon. An obedient soldier designed to counter and kill All Might. He laughed, confidence returning. You're strong, I'll give you that. But jumping down here, he laughed sadistically. You played yourself doing that. Thud, thud, thud. The Nomu stepped forward, placing itself squarely between Shigaraki and Taka. It loomed, massive, grotesque. An aura of raw physical power radiated from its frame. Its exposed brain pulsed faintly, its blank eyes and twisted grin were straight out of a nightmare. In front of such a monster, Taka, thud, grabbed his coat and tossed it aside. The impact cracked the ground. Then his hat followed, landing atop the coat and fracturing the stone even further. Weighted clothing. Shigaraki's face twitched. You said it was built to kill All Might. Taka's calm voice echoed across the plaza, freezing Shigaraki's widening grin. Swoosh. Crimson aura erupted around Taka once more as he shifted into a fighting stance. "Too bad for you," he said evenly. "I'm not All Might." That was enough. "Nomu, kill him," Shigaraki roared, all patience gone. The Nomu screeched, a shrill, inhuman sound, and kicked off the ground. So did Taka. Two blurs crossed the battlefield. Boom. And crashed. Degree. Top of the stairs, by the entrance. Boom, boom, boom. The entire class watched the raging battle from near the entrance, speechless. "Taka really is strong, huh?" Kirishima muttered, loud enough for all to hear, earning several silent nods in response. Even from this distance, they could barely follow his figure as it tore across the battlefield, clashing head-on with the villain with the brain exposed. In fact, if not for his aura acting like a blazing beacon, they would have lost track of him entirely. The shockwaves rolling through the area only reinforced the overwhelming power on display. "I guess we really underestimated him. He's almost," Zero hesitated for a second, "like All Might." A certain green-haired student twitched at the comment, his gaze sharpening as it remained locked on the distant fight. "Like All Might, huh?" Midoriya thought, fists clenching. Sarusen is right, Takahashi-san's power is on another level. Even if All Might made me his successor, can I really compete with something like that? It felt like two entirely different worlds, his and Taka's. And he wasn't the only one thinking that. Todoroki watched the battle with a serious, unsettled expression. During the combat exercise, he had thought that while Taka was strong, his power was still within reach. After all, that day he had let his emotions get the better of him and fallen straight into Taka's taunts. If he fought seriously, with a cool head, Todoroki believed he could close the gap. But now, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Now, he realized how pointless that belief had been. He had known Taka hadn't gone all out during the exercise, but the fight unfolding before him was nothing like what he had imagined. If this was truly the extent of Taka's power, then he had been utterly wrong. It was hard to believe that monster down there was their peer. Boom! Another shockwave exploded through the plaza, closer this time, making several students flinch. Bakugo stood frozen, much like Todoroki and Midoriya. He had come to UA believing he was special, that even at the top hero school in all of Japan, he would remain unmatched, just as he always had. Of course, he wasn't stupid. He knew others could have quirks as strong as his, maybe even stronger. And if there was anywhere those kinds of people would gather, it was UA. But to Bakugo, it had never been just about his quirk. It was him. He was the one who made the difference. Not his quirk. A peerless talent, that's what he was. The kind that made him the only one who could draw out his quirk's full potential and crush anyone who dared stand in his way. That was what he believed. That was what he expected. Now, that belief was cracking. He gaped at the battle, struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. A fight on a completely different level, speed he could barely track, power behind every blow leagues beyond his explosions, durability that allowed Taka to tank similar hits and strike back without hesitation. And all of it was coming from a mere classmate. Not a pro hero. Not All Might, but a classmate of his. The one he had fully believed he would surpass in time. Now, doubt began to creep in. His view of himself hadn't changed. To him, he was still a peerless genius, his quirk among the best in the world, and an attitude that would no doubt lead him to the top. But now, a question lingered, one he couldn't ignore. Will that be enough? Aizawa, don't overexert yourself. 13's voice suddenly echoed among the class, snapping most of them out of their daze. As everyone turned, they saw Aizawa struggling to get back on his feet, blood trickling down from his forehead. 13 stood beside him, gesturing insistently for him to stay down. I can't, not with Takahashi fighting that thing, Aizawa muttered, forcing himself upright despite the pain. His arms trembled, and judging from the blood on his face, fractures most likely riddled his skull. But that wasn't going to stop him. 13 placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You're wounded enough as it is. Iida already went to fetch help. It won't be long before All Might and the others get here, so lie down. Aizawa shrugged her hand off. The villain boss said that thing was built to kill All Might. I can't, in good faith, leave one of my students to fight that alone. He took a few unsteady steps forward under the students' worried gazes, doing his best to reach the stairs. But he didn't make it far. His legs gave out, and he collapsed to the ground once more. Damn it, Aizawa, 13 rushed to his side. Even if you wanted to help, right now Takahashi seems to be the only one capable of holding that thing back until reinforcements arrive. And at the level they are currently fighting, both of us couldn't even be able to keep up with them. Still, Aizawa struggled, planting his hands against the ground, refusing to give up. At least, until the sound of the battle approached. Aizawa frowned and lifted his head. Quote, exclamation mark, quote. At that instant, time seemed to freeze for but a brief moment for his trained eyes to capture the image of the two figures clashing as they passed close enough for him to see clearly. That's when he saw it. Taka and the Nomu, exchanging blows like a dance through the air, while an aura of crimson enveloped them. And more importantly, Aizawa caught a glimpse of Taka's face. The mask still hid his mouth, but even without seeing it, Aizawa knew. He was grinning. His student was grinning while fighting that monstrosity. Soon, time resumed again, and the two figures dashed away again, not so visible anymore save for Taka's powerful aura. As the two continued clashing in the distance, silence out of sheer disbelief drowned the class, at least, until Aizawa let out a laugh. Damn troublesome brat, he muttered. But for once, he stopped trying to get back up. Leaving everything to him was still not something he wanted to do. But if the brat looked that confident, then maybe, at a time like this, when the tide was leaning so unfavorably toward them, it was time to trust him. If Takahashi truly was their only chance at holding the villains back, then so be it. That said, the moment the battle tilted against the villains' favor, he wouldn't let pain stop him from rushing in. Even if he was far below their level, his erasure would still be effective against whatever quirks the mutant possessed, regardless of its overwhelming physical strength. Having reached that decision, he forced himself into a seated position, resting there as he, along with the class, watched the raging battle in awe. 13 let out a sigh at his stubbornness before turning to the students. Everyone, even though Takahashi is fighting the villains, you should all evacuate as soon as, Imaginary technique. My theme activated. Song chosen. Judas, Lady Gaga. Her words were cut short as something inexplicable happened. She stiffened, glancing around in confusion before grabbing her head. Bafflement spread across her hidden features. And she wasn't the only one. Aizawa did the same, his brows knitting into a deep frown. The students, however, too absorbed in the battle unfolding before them, failed to notice anything amiss. If they had, they might have realized. A melody was playing inside their heads. One that made their hearts pound in time with the rhythm of the battle. Degree. Back to the fight. Boom. A thunderous shockwave erupted as Taka was launched downward, his body wrapped in a blazing crimson aura, crashing like a meteor. CRCKRKCKRKC. The ground shattered as he dug his feet in, skidding across the concrete for several meters before finally coming to a halt. Ha ha ha, this is the shit I've been waiting for. Taka laughed beneath his mask. The chimes of aura earnings rang in his ears, sending a wave of euphoria through his body. Combined with the music pounding in his head, it pushed him into a near-crazed state. His gaze flicked upward, to his classmates, to the teachers, making sure they were watching. Then, elsewhere, and finally, back to the approaching Nomu. You better not miss it. As Taka rushed forward, the Nomu leapt skyward, reaching a terrifying height before descending, winding up a monstrous punch. Let's put on a show, alright. Taka's aura flared like a blowtorch. In the next instant, he launched himself upward to meet it, arms spread wide in invitation. Image greater than. Boom. Then, they collided once more, the air rippling from the sheer force of their fists crashing with one another. Of course, this isn't really doing anything, Taka thought, the smile never leaving his face. After the impact, Nomu's punch barely wavered. The only one pushed back was Taka himself, sent crashing down as the two descended like falling stars. They landed a few steps apart, and immediately lunged again. Boom. Another clash shook the plaza, concrete rupturing and spiderweb cracks spreading outward. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. This time, Taka slipped beneath the Nomu's guard and unleashed a barrage of strikes into the creature's torso. His fists blurred, hammering forward like Gatling guns, each blow packed with violence and precision. For a brief moment, it almost looked effective. Almost. Taka was forced to disengage as the Nomu swung a massive right hook, the blow whistling past his face by mere centimeters, and sending a gust of air similar to that of a tornado. Still too weak for that, huh? He snorted as he retreated. In the show, All Might had overwhelmed Nomu's shock absorption quirk by brute force, punching him so relentlessly that the quirk exceeded its absorption threshold and simply failed. Taka, strong as he was, didn't have the raw stats to replicate that yet. The threshold was still far out of reach. All Might had needed over 300 punches. He, on the other hand, would probably need 1,000. In delivering 1,000 punches just to deal -1 damage afterward. Yeah, that wouldn't look very cool. His thoughts were cut short as the Nomu charged again, massive fists winding up. Taka's grin widened. Instead of retreating, he stepped back in. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. A storm of punches erupted as both combatants exchanged blows at blinding speed. Despite its bulk, the Nomu was monstrously fast, each of its fists colliding with Taka's, the sheer force steadily driving the aura farmer backward. Taka gritted his teeth. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. 30,000 something aura sounded impressive. But split into 3 stats. A lot less so. Even dividing it into just 2, setting aura projection aside, his physicals barely reached 15,000 evenly. He could skew one higher, sure, but only by crippling the other. The Nomu, on the other hand, at least 20,000 in strength alone, Taka estimated. Minimum. And with shock absorption stacked on top of that, its effective defense was downright absurd. Right now, he was outmatched. If this continued, he'd be the one ground into dust. But that was something he had already anticipated. Swoosh. In the middle of the relentless exchange, Taka suddenly dropped low. In that fleeting opening, right as Nomu's punches sailed overhead, his aura erupted. Status page. Filled right pointing small triangle strength, 10,000 right pointing arrow 167. Filled right pointing small triangle defense, 18,316 right pointing arrow 6000. Filled right pointing small triangle aura projection, 8,000 right pointing arrow 30,149. BOOOOM. The aura detonated outward. Instead of slamming into the Nomu, it grabbed him, crimson energy coiling around the creature's frame, and hurled him away with brutal force. The Nomu was sent flying, unable to stabilize midair, its massive body tumbling across the plaza. Taka exhaled sharply as his aura recoiled back into him. Then, it flowed elsewhere. Behind him, she ate. The saw cleaver tore free from its restraints and flew into his waiting hand, the handle settling perfectly into his palm. Taka caught it, resting the massive weapon across his chest for a moment. "Say," he said calmly. "Does your shock absorption work on cuts?" He rolled his shoulder. Aura projection, even a stick is enough mode activated. And swung to his side. Sheeing, a thin line spread across the ground beside him. Bam, then the earth split apart, a fissure several meters deep, tearing open from that same thin line. With the demonstration over, Taka rolled his neck, took a deep breath, and squinted as he saw the Nomu finally land, only to immediately crush the ground beneath its feet and launch itself toward him again. As the monster charged, Taka let out an amused laugh. Status page. Filled right pointing small triangle strength, 167 right pointing arrow 6000. Filled right pointing small triangle defense, 6,000 right pointing arrow 10,000. Filled right pointing small triangle aura projection, 30,149 right pointing arrow 20,316. Shifting his stats, he settled into his stance, the unedged blade resting in his hand, ready to cut down anything in his path. A long, nervous breath escaped him. With these stats, getting hit even once would deal serious damage. Worse, his speed was noticeably lower than before, making evasion far more difficult. Still, the past 3 months hadn't been spent solely on discovering new AP modes or recomposing songs. He had uncovered a new affinity between skills. Let's Dance, activated. His eyes burned crimson as the saw cleaver vibrated with anticipation. If he got hit once, it would probably be over. On the other hand, he wasn't even certain this would damage the Nomu, and even if it did, the thing still possessed absurd regeneration. Something told him this wasn't the optimal choice. That this was stupid, that he should just aim at the brain of the thing, or something. But when had aura farming ever been optimal? All I need, he muttered, stepping forward, is not to get hit. Go all out. What is that weapon? Shigaraki squinted from his position, eyeing the saw cleaver in Taka's hand. Was he planning on cutting the Nomu? He let out a snort. It seems he isn't as dumb as one would expect from a brat. Shock absorption only worked on forces that propagated through the body long enough to be absorbed. Blunt force was ideal in that aspect, impact waves spreading through muscle and bone. It was exactly what the quirk specialized in. Cuts and piercing attacks, on the other hand, delivered damage too fast. The energy didn't linger long enough to be properly absorbed, and although the quirk certainly absorbed part of the damage, it was still more effective than just using blunt force. Still, a weapon won't cut it, Shigaraki grinned. Even if the brat could swing it at absurd speeds with either his abnormal strength or his strange telekinesis and deal massive damage to the Nomu, the weapon itself would probably shatter after the first strike. No metal could withstand the level of force required to injure the Nomu effectively. And even worse, the damage it would do would quickly get negated the next second, since Nomu had super regeneration. Losing a limb or two meant nothing when they could be regrown in seconds. And that was only if the weapon even landed. Nomu was built to be comparable to All Might in physical prowess. Even if the kid swung it with all his might, the Nomu could easily grab it midswing and crush it barehanded. Unfortunately, Shigaraki muttered, his grin widening into something manic, even if you found the type advantage, the stat difference is just too large. His excitement and laughter surged as the Nomu charged once more. Now, let me hear it, he hissed, pupils shrinking as he locked onto Taka, who was preparing to swing, the beautiful sound of your hope breaking apart. Soon, both combatants were upon each other, attacks ready and wound up. But that's when it happened, when he noticed a weird detail in Taka's weapon. Hold on, his eyes narrowed, looking at the cleaver, dumbfounded. Quote. Why does that thing have no edge? Shiiiiiin. The shrill sound of air being split apart screamed through the plaza, stabbing straight into his ears. Shigaraki recoiled, face twisting as he struggled to keep his eyes on the battlefield through the sudden pain. And that's when he saw it. Reflected in his widened eyes was the image of Nomu throwing a punch. Splat, only for its arm to separate from its body before it could even connect, falling uselessly to the floor. And Taka, who had swung, now stood behind the Nomu, his arm still extended along the weapon, as if frozen mid-motion after his slash. The saw cleaver was intact. That can't be, Shigaraki roared. Back to the clash, after the bloody exchange, Taka slowly turned, leveling the cleaver straight at the Nomu. Seems pretty effective, doesn't it? The mutant turned as well. Then, its bisected arm began to regenerate. Muscle, tissue, and bone knitted back together in seconds, flesh crawling unnaturally fast until the limb was whole once more. Soon, the Nomu stood complete again, posture steady, ready to continue as if nothing had happened. Partially effective, I suppose, Taka muttered wryly, letting out a sigh. Swoosh, the brief calm shattered instantly. Both figures blurred, air screaming as they crossed the plaza like streaks of shadow and collided once more. Clang, 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 metal struck flesh again and again, the sounds ringing relentlessly as they tore across the battlefield. The ground cracked beneath their feet, pressure waves rippling outward, whipping the air into violent currents. Nearby, Shigaraki was forced to brace himself, digging his heels in just to avoid being blown away. Farther above, the students were spared the worst of it, but even from that distance, the fierce winds reaching them made the sheer intensity of the clash unmistakable. Squelch! Suddenly, something burst free from the center of the fight. An arm. Blood trailed behind it as it spun through the air. The Nomu's shoulder had been bisected cleanly, the force of the cut lifting the severed stump upward. But before the arm could even hit the ground, muscle and tissue surged forth once more. Even as Nomu wound up a punch with the arm it had just lost, flesh regenerated mid-motion, reforming the limb in the span of a heartbeat. Clang, crack, Taka blocked the punch with his weapon, the impact driving his feet into the ground as the earth fractured beneath him. But instead of being crushed, he twisted. Redirecting the force sideways, Taka slipped under the Nomu's guard in a single smooth motion. Slash, and once again, limbs were sent flying. This time, both arms. The Nomu barely seemed to register the pain. Instead, it pivoted and drove a powerful kick straight at Taka. Bam! Forced on the defensive once more, Taka brought up his weapon just in time, only to be hurled backward by the recoil. Crickasy cake. His boots carved a trail of destruction through the concrete as he skidded across the plaza, a frown settling over his features. Then, without even a breath to recover, the Nomu was already there. Its arms, mostly regenerated, came down in a storm. Clang, 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 kgh. A blindingly fast barrage of fists rained down. Taka barely kept up, blocking each strike with the saw cleaver by instinct alone, the impacts rattling his bones through the handle. Then, Taka found an opening amidst the barrage. He slipped past a punch by a hair's breadth, blade flashing as he passed. Slash! Both arms came apart again. This time, however, he didn't stop there. As he moved, the cleaver carved lower, severing a leg, before Taka vaulted upward and repositioned himself atop the Nomu's back. Outside the creature's field of view, aura surged into the palm of his hand. Then he struck. Boom! A burst of raw kinetic force detonated against the Nomu's spine, launching the monster bodily across the plaza and into the outer wall of the USJ. A distant explosion echoed as concrete collapsed. Repositioning himself, Taka let out a weary sigh. Damn, that guy's tricky, he muttered as he glanced at the distant figure get swallowed by a dust cloud. He dragged a thumb across his cheek, wiping away the blood splattered there. Then, he surveyed the surrounding battlefield after their exchange. Plenty of arms and a few legs were sprawled around, making him wince slightly. That's one nasty view. Good thing the smell's slower than both of us, or I'd be gagging by now. At least the Nomu was zombified enough that guilt didn't factor in. If this were anyone else, he might hesitate, or not, he still didn't know. His gaze dropped to the saw cleaver. Tiny dents had begun to form along its surface. Thankfully, the even a stick is enough skill didn't just grant sharpness, it reinforced durability as well, letting the weapon survive the recoil and, as he had done, use it to parry attacks, which lessened the danger of not having too many points in defense like right now. Still, it seemed that despite the skill's durability reinforcement, the Nomu's strength was beginning to break through what it could handle, as seen by the dents. And not only that, but it broke, Taka realized. His eyes shifted from the blade to his arm. White peeked through torn flesh, a pretty little bone waving at him amiably from there. It was a jarring pain he hadn't even noticed until now. Clicking his tongue, he shoved it back into place with his aura and funneled his healing skill into the injury. 2,000 aura vanished in an instant. The arm knitted itself back together, although not perfectly, just the part where the bone was shattered, fusing both parts back together. A full heal of muscle, tissue, and bone would take too much aura that he wasn't willing to spend right now. He flexed it once. Although there was pain and strain, it worked. Still, this isn't looking good. Taka kept his eyes on the distant dust cloud, fully expecting the Nomu to burst out of it at any moment, good as new. The gap in physical prowess was too wide. Let's Dance was doing its job, sharpening his instincts, accelerating his decision-making, letting him move wilder and faster with the blade than he otherwise could. Combined with the enhanced durability of his weapon being used for blocking, it was the only reason he was still standing. But even then, the fight had a clear rhythm now. He was blocking, sure. But with every block, as he'd already learned when bone had peeked through flesh, he too received part of the brunt, getting injured. They were injuries he could heal and waste aura on. Or injuries he could ignore, and lose functionality against a monster that already outmatched him physically. And worse still, the Nomu regenerated far more easily than he did. This wasn't a battle of strength anymore. It was a battle of attrition. One he was losing quite clearly. Taka let out a long breath, more troubled than afraid. I wanted to keep this under wraps for later, he admitted inwardly, eyes flicking briefly toward the stairs above, where he could still make out the silhouettes of his classmates. He clicked his tongue. But if I don't want to have my spotlight stolen by All Might. His gaze snapped back to the dust cloud as his aura flared. Then I'll have to go all out. This time, something changed. The crimson aura still surrounded him, but it wasn't alone anymore. Crackle, electricity began dancing through it. Thin arcs of lightning crawled along his body, snapping and hissing through the air. Aura Projection Master of Elements mode activated. Description: in his wake, the aura farmer shapes the world around him. Thunder rains down once he gets serious. Fire swallows his surroundings in his anger. Ice freezes the very ground once his calmness spreads. Mountains and earth itself part before his pace. Because what kind of aura farmer would he be, without the very elements helping him look cool? Filled right pointing small triangle allows the user to imbue aura with elemental properties. Filled right pointing small triangle higher aura output increases intensity and or destructive potential. Filled right pointing small triangle elemental byproducts dissipate as aura regenerates. Behind his mask, Taka smiled faintly. He began walking forward. Now then, he murmured, electricity crackling louder with each step. Let's see how far your regeneration gets you. At that moment, a shape erupted from the dust cloud. The Nomu launched skyward like a missile, fully regenerated, before immediately diving back down toward him, winding up a monstrous punch. In the blink of an eye, the mutant was already there, just some meters from crashing down. But Taka didn't raise his weapon, didn't shift his stats. He simply lifted his palm. When you can't even move. Crackle, aura surged, taking on the shape of lightning and tearing forward. In an instant, it struck. The lightning slammed into the Nomu mid-motion, freezing its punch halfway through. What should have been a devastating, meteor-like blow never landed. Instead, the Nomu dropped, uselessly, crashing into the ground, and rolling uncontrollably past Taka. Taka calmly stepped aside as it did, the uncontrolled fall of the mutant cracking the floor in its wake. As the creature skidded past him, he moved after it, already accelerating. The Nomu tried to move, to get back on his feet and respond to its chaser. But its body only betrayed it, violent spasms racking its frame as electricity tore through its nervous system. That was enough. Taka vanished, red streaks carved through the air where his eyes had been only a moment before. And then, shrock, 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 4 blinding flashes. Limbs flew, arms and legs were severed cleanly, spinning away before hitting the ground in a series of dull, wet impacts. Thud, deprived of articulations, the Nomu collapsed in a heap, blood pooling beneath it. Taka winced faintly at the sight, but didn't hesitate. He raised his hand again. This time, his aura surged forward not as lightning, but as fire. FWOOOOSH. Roaring flames engulfed the Nomu in an instant, swallowing it whole. Seconds later, the inferno died down as Taka whipped his arm sideways to shake any ember or remaining smoke away. Then, he squinted at what remained. The Nomu wasn't dead, but it certainly wasn't in a pretty condition. Its flesh was charred and blistered, regeneration sluggish and uneven. Whether its healing had hit a limit or was simply being disrupted no longer mattered. Either way, this was exactly as Taka had expected. As a reanimated corpse, with its brain exposed to top it off, the lightning had struck its brain directly, frying its nervous system and preventing the Nomu from responding properly to the threat. The fire followed, interfering with regeneration, whether by cauterizing tissue or simply overwhelming the process with damage. Taka wasn't entirely sure which. Not that it mattered. As expected, the skill was brutally effective. Well, he thought dryly, it damn well better be. I spent 10,000 aura on those 2 attacks alone. His remaining aura sat at 26,000. It was regenerating quickly once the lightning bolt and fire did their job, but the number remained low for his taste, considering what it had taken to put the Nomu down. His QQ mode could have probably done the job much better, literally burning the Nomu to a pile of ash, but he wasn't about to show that skill here and now. There would be a better moment for it. Still, the threat was effectively neutralized, and that's what mattered. From what he was seeing, what once took mere seconds to regenerate now required nearly a full minute per limb. Even if the Nomu managed to stand again, Taka could deal with it easily. Humming under his breath, he turned toward Shigaraki. The villain froze the moment their eyes met, and for good reason. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, Taka vanished, and reappeared right in front of him. The sudden displacement of air slammed into Shigaraki, forcing a grunt out of him as he staggered back. Why you? The villain spoke with hatred, but was cut off as he saw Taka's threatening figure lock eyes with him. If I take you down, that thing won't move anymore, will it? Anger flared across Shigaraki's face. You, damn it, where the fuck did you come from? He lunged, decay bubbling across his palms as he reached for Taka. But just centimeters before contact. Ugh. Why you? His hands stopped. No, his whole body did. Shigaraki's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. The aura surrounding Taka had already spread over him as well. It pinned him in place, locking his body to the ground as Taka stepped closer. An arm should be enough to knock you out, Taka said, raising the saw cleaver. Panic flashed across Shigaraki's eyes. Shigaraki! Kurogiri shouted. Dark mist surged forward, rushing toward Taka in an attempt to separate them. But it stopped. Taka's aura expanded outward, forcing the mist back and freezing Kurogiri in place in the process. For a brief moment, both villains were caught within his control. Taka adjusted his grip, preparing to strike. Nomuuu! Shigaraki screamed. A distorted roar answered him. Taka snapped his head to the side. The Nomu, mangled, legs only half regenerated and arms barely restored, was charging toward them with reckless desperation. Even in that state, its speed was still impressive. Bam! Its punch landed on Taka's weapon, forcing him several steps back. The pressure broke his hold, the aura restraining Shigaraki and Kurogiri pulling away. Like a wounded animal, the Nomu attacked wildly. It wasn't trying to kill Taka anymore. It was trying to keep him away. Their clash resumed immediately, but this time Taka blocked each desperate strike with ease, reading every movement of the halfway regenerating Nomu. As they fought, Kurogiri turned sharply toward Shigaraki. "Shigaraki Tamura, we must retreat. The Nomu won't be able to hold him much longer." Why, damn Subboss," Shigaraki muttered, scratching at his neck as he glared at the fight. Of all things, why the hell did it have to be a Subboss? We had everything, but he ruined it all. A portal opened beside him. "Let's go," Kurogiri said firmly. "There's nothing more we can do here." Shigaraki clenched his teeth. After a moment, he exhaled sharply, his scratching stopping. Fine. He stepped toward the portal, expression vacant. But before he could fully cross it, "Shigaraki Tamura, watch out." Kurogiri's shout reached him too late. Shigaraki's head snapped back. And the world seemed to slow. Taka was already there. The saw cleaver was swinging straight toward him. For once, it wasn't just panic. As those red eyes locked onto him, cold and focused, and the weapon descended toward him, Shigaraki felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. Bam! The moment was shattered as the Nomu suddenly appeared and slammed into Taka with brutal force, sending him flying several meters before crashing into the fountain at the center of the plaza. Debris and water erupted from the impact, a dust cloud swallowing Taka whole. Even so, the feeling of fear lingered. Cold sweat soaked Shigaraki as he retreated into the portal, never taking his eyes off the dust cloud, half expecting Taka to burst out of it and dash at him. Kurogiri followed close behind. For a moment, he glanced at the Nomu, which was already moving toward the fountain to continue holding Taka back. He briefly considered retrieving it, but the mutant was the only thing keeping the boy occupied. Shaking his head, Kurogiri stepped through the portal. A moment later, it closed behind him, thus putting an anticlimactic end to the villain attack. Soon after, the dust cloud began to settle, revealing Taka lying amid shattered stone and splashing water, blood trickling down from his forehead. Took them long enough. With a grunt, he pushed himself upright, brushing debris from his clothes before looking ahead. The Nomu stood there, unmoving. Its gaze was vacant, no longer aggressive. Whatever connection Shigaraki had used to control it was gone. Now it was just the mindless corpse it had always been. Taka groaned softly and sent a wave of healing aura through his body, enough to mend fractures, but not enough to erase every wound. Putting on a show really takes a toll, he muttered as the pain fully set in without adrenaline to dull it. He had deliberately gone out of his way to scare Shigaraki badly enough to force a retreat. In the process, he had allowed himself to take hits from the Nomu, just to sell the idea that he had been stopped. If he truly wanted to, Shigaraki could have died here, or at the very least, lost the hands that gave his quirk meaning. But your usefulness isn't over yet, he thought, squinting at the spot where the villains had disappeared. You'll get me plenty of aura from now on. He snorted, eyes gleaming with a calculating light. So grow stronger, Shigaraki, oof. A sharp wince followed as pain surged through his body again. He had dumped a good portion of his stats into defense to make sure those last hits from the Nomu wouldn't kill him, but that's all they did, not kill him. The damage was still substantial. Annoyed, he glanced at the Nomu. Boom! A burst of aura slammed into it, launching the creature toward the mountainous section of the facility and embedding it in the rocks. Doesn't feel good, does it? He was petty like that. Satisfied, Taka turned and headed toward the stairs leading up to the students' area, retrieving his coat and hat along the way. Once there, he looked up at them. And not just them. Standing at the edge was another figure, staring down at him with an unreadable expression, one that made Taka grin. The symbol of peace had arrived. But, as it seemed, too late. All Might. Taka chuckled in a low voice. Then he blinked as a bead of blood slid past his eye. Looks like those last hits did more damage than I thought. Smiling wryly, Taka closed his eyes and slicked his hair back, the blood keeping it in place. He felt awful, sticky, dusty. Every movement sent a dull ache through his body. He could have cleaned himself up with his skill. But sometimes, a little blood after a battle just looked cooler. Wrapping things up, minutes earlier, All Might's paw. My heart pounded against my chest, sharp pain tearing through my body as I dashed toward the USJ at full speed. I was overexerting myself. The 3 standard hours I could maintain this form had long since been spent earlier in the day, after going out of my way to help civilians in distress. Now, I was pushing my body well past its limit. But I didn't care. I forced myself forward, ignoring the burning pain in my stomach and further down as the facility in the distance rapidly drew closer. I couldn't allow the students to be harmed. Not when it was my fault I hadn't been there from the beginning. This pain was my punishment for being irresponsible, and I wouldn't let anyone but me pay the price. Bam! Seconds later, I crashed through the facility gate, sending it flying aside so I wouldn't waste even a single moment. I braced myself for the worst, for the consequences of my delay to have already taken their toll on my students. But instead, All Might, you're here, thank God. All of the students were present and safe, along with my fellow teachers, Aizawa-kun and 13. I froze for a brief moment, taking in the sight, relief washing over me before I winced at Aizawa-kun's condition. His injuries were severe. A battle had clearly taken place. And yet, he was sitting calmly on the ground. How so? Young Iida described the situation as one incredibly dire, with several villains taking over this place and with the plan of killing me, which, if they were smart, meant they weren't relying solely on numbers, but on power that should contend with me as well. Despite this, Aizawa-kun looked nowhere near worried. Was my assumption wrong? Were the villains that easily taken care of, despite their confidence? Boom! My thoughts were cut off as a distant shockwave of tremendous force echoed through the facility, drawing everyone's attention. My alert spiked back, although still mixed with the confusion as to why my usually serious coworker was so calm in this situation. I moved quickly toward the stairs, scanning the battlefield below. And that's when I saw him and realized one student had been missing. Thuts. Young Takahashi. He was currently buried in a pile of rubble and water, clearly having just crashed into the central fountain, dust still lingering from his recent crash. And not far from him, an enormous mutant with bulging muscles stood imposingly, arms and legs mangled, but not diminishing his terrifying frame in the slightest. If anything, it only made him even more eerie. Was he the reason the villains were so confident to attack UA so brazenly? I felt danger oozing just from the mere sight of him. Perhaps it was his nonchalance despite the massive damage across his legs and arms. Perhaps it was his terrifying appearance and frame. Or perhaps, it was the fact that he had defeated young Takahashi, a youth with amazing power already stronger than many pros. Either way, it didn't matter. I was here now. Don't worry, young Takahashi, I'm Kami. For a moment, I almost rushed to help young Takahashi, not about to watch one of my students be finished off in front of my eyes. But before I had the chance to, young Takahashi moved. He stood, looking barely fazed by his injuries or any pain of the sort. He simply brushed the dust off his clothes with all the calm of the world, and then looked at the villain. Boom, only to shoot a surge of energy toward him before I could even process it, and send the villain flying away until he crashed into the landslide zone, embedding him into the mountains and causing a small explosion of dust and rock. My eyes widened at the sight. That much force, it was unbelievable. Far beyond anything he had shown during the combat exercises. And yet, as if nothing had happened, he calmly turned away from the direction he had sent his opponent, retrieved the clothes he had apparently left on the ground not too far away, and calmly walked toward the base of the stairs. And that's when he saw me. Our eyes met. I was too stunned to say something, so for a moment, only silence passed between us. And then, just for a moment, I saw it. Challenge. Combined with the dozens of unconscious villains scattered behind him, the destruction across the facility, what I had just witnessed, and the faint crimson wisps of energy still clinging to him, a wry laugh escaped my mouth. I see, so that's why the principal mentioned him. After our first class, I had assumed the principal's reason for mentioning him was only due to young Takahashi's quirk. With power like that, it would have made sense. It was a 1 in a million quirk. No, maybe even more. But now, I realized I had missed the larger picture entirely. This boy was truly strong. Not just in terms of his quirk. Even without witnessing the full battle, his battered yet steady stance, the blood staining him, the sheer number of defeated villains, and the level of power he had just wielded, they all told me everything I had to know. This wasn't mere strength, it was experience, combat instincts, courage, and from what I just saw in his eyes, ambition, too. And he was only 15. My gaze briefly shifted to young Midoriya, who watched him with unmistakable awe, and a bit of apprehension too. Compared to him, young Midoriya was clearly lacking. The 10 months we spent training were in no way enough to reach the boy's level. It'd be a long, long time before that happened. And what now worried me most, with competition like that, the goal I had given young Midoriya of succeeding me would only crush him with someone like that constantly by his side. Although perhaps it wasn't that bad a thing. If the two pushed each other forward, maybe they'd reach levels even I never reached. Although for that, a lot of pain awaited. It seems my student's path is full of hardship ahead, I thought wryly. Once again, I turned to young Takahashi, who was now climbing the stairs with a composed and steady pace, his eyes dead set on the top. Whether the top of the stairs, or me, I don't know. Maybe even both. He sure is one scary boy. Degree. Third person Pav. While Taka climbed the stairs at a deliberate pace, several figures entered through the facility gate. Exclamation mark quote. Hearing them arrive, everyone already there turned, quickly recognizing the arrivals as UA's teachers, already geared up and ready for combat. Midnight, Smintos, Snipe, Power Loader, Present Mike, and several others who were, of course, very relevant to the show. And, Nezu, along with them stood Iida, chest puffed out slightly, pride clear on his face at having successfully brought reinforcements. I have returned with help. His enthusiasm died as he sensed the somewhat calm air around. Present Mike raised an eyebrow as he spotted the number 1 hero standing calmly at the top of the stairs. All Might already got here. Did he already deal with the threat then? Smintos asked, noting how the students were unharmed, and how both 13 and Aizawa remained behind him, relatively composed. The air felt far too calm for a battlefield that had just been invaded by what their student had described as hundreds of villains. Naturally, everyone assumed that calm came from All Might's presence. At least, until someone finished climbing the stairs. A figure stepped into view, and several teachers flinched. Exclamation mark quote. Bloody clothes, disheveled hair, a torn, ragged costume, eyes fixed forward with a dead seriousness that made more than one flinch. For a brief moment, some of the staff mistook him for a villain, making their postures shift to one of readiness for combat. The pressure around him made it hard to think otherwise. But before anyone could act rashly, Nezu raised a paw. Calm down, everyone, the principal said calmly. Then he smiled with a hint of self-mockery. It seems we are already too late. Principal, Snipe asked, squinting. What do you mean? The rat gestured toward the figure, smiling softly. I mean, our student seems to have already taken care of everything. Student. The reaction was immediate. Teachers turned, reassessing the newcomer, and the pieces began to fall into place. His battered appearance, Nezu's words, All Might's lack of action, and nearly 100 villains sprawled unconscious across the facility. It soon clicked for them. The one who had stopped the attack hadn't been the symbol of peace. It had been a student, a very villain-looking one. Allegedly, the blood added the most villainous part. The edginess just complemented it. A student was the one who dealt with all this. Many teachers thought, eyes widening in shock. Ignoring the stares, Taka walked forward until he stood before All Might. Young Takahashi, All Might hesitated, clearly at a loss about what to say regarding what happened. Part of him wanted to ask what had happened, to comment on his strength, to pat his shoulder for protecting his classmates and teachers. But in the end, there was one matter that took priority over all those. Are you all right? Were you injured? He asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. Given the amount of blood on him, the concern was more than justified. Taka, however, just shot him a dismissive glance. Just some scratches. These guys were too weak to achieve more than that. All Might genuinely didn't know how to respond to that. I suggest you go secure them, Taka added calmly, loud enough for the other teachers to hear as well, jerking a thumb toward the unconscious villains. Before they wake up. The teachers followed his gesture, then, after seemingly thinking it over for a second, they nodded to one another and moved out without argument. Meanwhile, Taka walked past All Might and toward his classmates. As he did, the blood and dust coating his clothes faded away, vanishing as if he were a game character, and blood textures reached their time limit of existence. What remained after that was a torn, but spotless, uniform. The class watched him approach in stunned silence. Then, I'm back, he said flatly, as he'd just returned from an errand. The collective thought was unanimous. What the hell is wrong with this guy? Comma. Degree. 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 Minutes later, comma. Soon after, the police arrived, and the villains were loaded onto prison transport buses. Questions were inevitable after an incident of this scale. Naturally, more than a few eyebrows rose when it came out that Taka had held the villains off on his own. Still, after all Might's pleas, the students were allowed to leave, on the condition they would be questioned properly at a later date. So, after a handful of procedures and statements handled by both police and teachers, Class 1A began boarding the bus. Taka and Yaoyorozu led the line as class representatives. As they stepped inside, several gazes landed on Taka, his vicereps included, making the atmosphere noticeably awkward. I guess this is the price of aura farming, Taka thought, shaking his head faintly. This was something he'd have to get used to. He was, after all, a student, not Batman. Although he would love to just disappear after looking cool to add some mystery and skip awkward moments like this, he simply couldn't. At least, not without making it 100 times more awkward when I inevitably have to return. Having such thoughts to distract himself from the constant gazes, eventually, everyone was on board, so both class reps followed. And sadly for him, the first thing he noticed was that the back seats were already taken. The only seat remaining was, "I saved you a spot, Taka." Kirishima waved enthusiastically from the front rows, 2 lines of seats facing each other for extra awkwardness. Taka paused at the entrance, expression flat. Is the world punishing me for something? Thanks. Grumbling internally but not about to refuse, Taka made his way over and sat beside Kirishima. Once there, he closed his eyes, crossed his arms, and leaned back, appearing to rest. That way, if his classmates were sensible, they would know not to bother him. He had, after all, just fought dozens of villains and beaten up a guy able to fight All Might. And it seemed he was right. While they waited for the bus to get on its way, no one said a thing save for some small whispers every now and then across the bus. But even if they didn't say anything, I can feel their gazes piercing my skull. Taka thought wryly. He could feel it, their curiosity. They wanted to ask. Midoriya, in particular, probably wanted to give one of his commentaries. This wouldn't be happening in the back, Taka thought grimly. I miss you, Tokiyami. You and your blessed silence. Man, you're really strong. Kirishima's voice suddenly cut through the tense air. Quote. Taka cracked one eye open and glanced at his seat neighbor. The difference between you and us is insane, Kirishima continued, fist clenching. Today, we couldn't do anything. Honestly, I think I even made things worse. 13 couldn't defend properly because we were in the way. If you hadn't been there, everything would have gone exactly how the villains planned. Come on, man, Sato spoke up from further down the bus. Don't say it like that. It's true, Kirishima shot back. Bakugo and I both just made things worse. A sharp click of a tongue echoed somewhere on the bus. But even he didn't refute the words. Silence stretched. No one could say a thing because Kirishima was right about their earlier screw-up. Anything they said would just be empty words of comfort. At least, until Taka's voice cut through the tension, his voice unbothered by the heavy tone of the conversation. Then do better next time. Kirishima blinked in surprise, turning toward him. Taka hadn't moved, still sitting in the same meditative posture. If you messed up, learn from it, he continued. That's it. But, it wasn't just a mistake, Kirishima protested, his voice rising. This was real danger. What we did was. Do you think I'm weak? Taka interrupted. That alone threw Kirishima off. Ino. Then what danger are you talking about? Taka asked again, eyes still closed. What? You think it was dangerous, but it was never so. Do you know why? Because I'm strong, Taka answered for him, eyes glinting red slightly. And therefore, so long as I'm here, no screw-up will be fatal, and no situation dangerous. Then, Taka closed his eyes again, relaxing in his seat. So learn and improve, rely on that for now. Then, after a pause, he opened one eye once more. Then maybe one day, you'll be the one backing me up when I make a mistake. Kirishima's eyes widened, he looked at his clenched fist, opened it, and reclenched it once more. This time, without frustration, but with determination. All right, I'm fired up already. The fight is already over, though, Kirishima-kun, Asui pointed out calmly. No, I mean fired up for tomorrow. And the day after that. Not, like, right now. Although I am fired up right now too, just, you know. Motivation fades, Kaminari said with a grin. You sure you'll still feel like that tomorrow? It would be unmanly to not do so. Kirishima shot back without hesitation. As the conversation around the bus lightened, Taka huffed quietly through his nose. So much resistance built up against edginess, yet corny stuff still makes me want to curl up and die, his inner self groaned, mentally slamming its head against a mental wall after that little speech. Still, it worked. Kirishima looked better already, and as much as Taka wanted to disappear into a corner, he had to admit it. Guess this is just part of the job when you live in a shonen anime, he thought, letting out a quiet sigh. Being a cornball. As he thought so, the bus suddenly started humming, the driver's cabin closing not long after. Soon after, the bus began departing, back to UA, while everyone chatted and Taka calmly rested in his seat. But as the bus departed, Taka's eyes opened. Leaning back, he turned his gaze to the window behind him, looking out at the massive USJ facility as it faded into the distance. Far near the entrance, he spotted the Nomu being transported in heavy restraints toward a vehicle clearly designed for something much larger than a normal criminal. He recalled their fight. Today, he was able to once again get a proper grasp of where he stood in the food chain of this world. Unlike with Gigantomachia, here he was not overwhelmed. Although he didn't dominate outright, he wouldn't call it a fierce fight either. He ignored many obvious weaknesses of the Nomu throughout their fight, such as what would probably happen if he damaged the exposed brain, cut its head off, or just went for the kill rather than submission, as he did by solely cutting the guy's legs and arms off. Which was pretty gruesome, he had to admit. He could still feel some gazes around, probably bothered by that. Fortunately, its regeneration had lessened the shock, even if slightly. So they hadn't outright brought it up. Though the police would certainly do. So much trouble just for not outright evaporating him with a blast of aura. Taka sighed. Considering all the consequences coming for his ass later, Taka almost felt this hadn't been worth it. The watchers at that time had only been his classmates and teachers, after all. The effort-gain ratio wasn't very balanced. But there's a reason he only almost felt it hadn't been worth it. His eyes drifted upward, to the top of the USJ dome. There, a figure stood with its cape flowing, arms crossed as the sunlight hit it head-on. What the hell is he doing? Taka deadpanned. The figure turned. And then, it took something out of its robes, flashing it to Taka, along with a thumbs up. A camera. For once, a full smile spread across Taka's face. The reason he hadn't outright cheesed the Nomu, why he hadn't held him in the air, attacked the brain, or tried to kill him in general, was because of that. The incident would go viral in the media after this, that was for sure. And when a literal footage of him fighting the villains went out. Hey, he let out a quiet laugh. The food chain hierarchy would be moving once again. 32 comments 0 vote. Reality check. Some hours later, the students were finally allowed to leave the school premises to rest after the turbulent day. Naturally, the news regarding the USJ incident spread quickly. Within hours, every major news program was covering it. The best hero school in Japan had been attacked by villains, something that went far beyond a simple crime. To many, it felt closer to an act of terrorism aimed directly at the foundation of hero society. However, official information was scarce. Reports only confirmed that the villains had been defeated without major damage or injury to the students involved, that the two who seemed to be the ringleaders of the whole operation had managed to escape, and some brief descriptions of the quirks involved. With no further details released, the public assumed what seemed obvious. All Might, supported by UA's faculty, had resolved the crisis. As a result, after the initial shock, public attention slowly began to settle as both the school and hero society remained ultimately unshaken by all this. At least, that was the case, until something happened late at night on the same day. As news stations prepared to wrap up their final broadcasts, something unusual occurred in several of their main offices. Flash drives appeared on the desks of senior producers and late-night editors. Each carried a short, handwritten note. USJ incident. Some ignored them, others dismissed them as a prank of their coworkers, while others simply didn't see it. But a few, driven by curiosity and the promise of exclusive information about the most recent villain attack on the best hero school, decided to check their contents. That was all it took. Once the footage stored there was seen and confirmed, the decision was made. Soon, The truth about what took place inside the USJ was aired as breaking last-minute material by the stations that fell for their curiosity, transmitting for the whole of Japan to see that night, and with it, lots of talk online soon followed. Not only because UA was involved anymore, but because of what was shown there. A battle, one fought not between heroes and villains as was usual, but between a villain and a student. At first, the young man's identity was unclear. His damaged, intimidating costume led many to believe he was a villain himself. But after verification and cross-referencing, the truth emerged. He was a student, a first-year one to top it off. And that only raised more questions. The footage showed the student shielding his classmates from a dark, mist-like villain that sought to engulf them, breaking through the encasement with a burst of red light that functioned as both offense and protection. It showed him incapacitating dozens of villains in seconds, moving with speed that barely registered on camera. It showed him standing his ground against an overwhelmingly powerful mutant, the fight so fast that broadcasters were forced to use slow motion to follow it. It showed blood, injury, and a brutal exchange in which the student drew a blade and struck the creature down several times, only for it to regenerate. And finally, it showed him unleashing one last attack, lightning and fire surging from his palms, pushing the monster to its limits before turning his attention to the villains watching from afar. By morning, the entire country was talking, trying to make sense of what they had just seen. The idea that a first-year student had taken down so many villains and fought evenly against a monster-level opponent, one who, from the looks of it, was strong enough to seriously injure top heroes, felt unreal. He was 15, after all. Not even All Might had shown this much promise when he was that age. Though, to be fair, neither did he have a terrorist attack happen at UA to deal with it. But it wasn't just the outcome that stunned people. It was also the abilities on display from both sides, something almost bizarre in the eyes of everyone. The mutant villain seemed able to negate blunt force with his quirk, judging by the ease with which he ignored the student's early barrage of punches, only to somehow be affected by the slashes of his opponent once he took out his blade. But then, it went even further, as the moment one of its arms was sent flying, the footage showed clearly how he regenerated it in a matter of seconds. So either he had one quirk able to somehow negate blunt force and heal him at the same time, or he had two. The student, however, didn't let down either. During the fight, he showed overwhelming speed, strength, and endurance, and displayed an energy-based ability that acted like telekinesis, yet also sliced and transformed into both lightning and fire. A strange quirk that left many baffled and wanting for answers about its true nature. But the mystery didn't obscure the main focus of the people. That being that a mere student was the one who dealt with all this, right at the beginning of his high school years, at that. What had initially been dismissed as another major incident swiftly handled by All Might was now being seen in a completely different light, a disaster that most pros would struggle with, top ones even, handled by a kid alone. Naturally, the public was excited. The idea of such a strong student becoming a future hero brought hope. If this was his ability only 2 weeks into UA, how strong would he become by graduation? For many, the future looked bright. But not everyone agreed. Some looked past the raw power and fixated on something else. The violence shown. A 15-year-old, already capable of mutilating a villain. The brutality could be chalked up to desperation, but his posture, precision, and discipline didn't look desperate. It looked like carefully thought out and calculated steps. That raised concerns. Although injuries and worse were sometimes expected from a profession such as this, it wasn't just the act that shocked the people, but the age of the one doing them, and his attitude toward it. A kid already capable of doing that without batting an eye, just what kind of pro hero would he grow up to become? And probably not only a pro hero, but one of the top ones at that. Others questioned UA's teachers for allowing a kid to be the one to shoulder all that. Where was All Might during that fight? Why were the teachers not there to help? In summary, how the hell had a mere student been forced to deal with a terrorist attack on his own? But while debates about morals and ethics continued, online discussions had already drifted to more chaotic territory, as was characteristic. Newlock 1L. Some PPL out there winning the quirk lottery while I'm stuck with the power to make my nose hair longer. Right pointing arrow Captain Bush. Mine's making my ass hair longer, we must be related. Orednicell 777, he's got moves. Unless his quirk teaches him to fight like that, he must have trained a lot. As expected of a UA student. Team Cold. What's with that villain? He looks like he dumbs out at the end when the kid slams him without resistance. Right pointing arrow, I create pallets. Maybe he was just too tired. Dude went wild in the last minutes, moving even without some extremities. Maybe his body hit its limit. Right pointing arrow, quirk connoisseur 42, he freezes up when the other two villains leave. The student also went for them, so maybe the big guy was being controlled. Brainwashing or something. Right pointing arrow, hot dog maker, maybe he was sad he got abandoned lol. Lamonstone god, who would win, unknown UA first year or All Might. Right pointing arrow, septic 89, bro, comparing anyone to All Might is a joke. Right pointing arrow, steel lunchbox, compare him to someone actually measurable lol. Right pointing arrow, Arcanesis fanboy, how about Rockinesis? Both have a telekinesis type quirk. Right pointing arrow, iWriterage bait, now that you say it, they are kinda similar. The only difference is that Rockinesis has like 10 abilities in one quirk. This kid's like 3. Right pointing arrow, Joe Mama 66, maybe he'll get more. The energy around him seems to be the source. Maybe he compresses it into blades for cutting. No clue about the lightning and fire though. Right pointing arrow, Tin Foil Hero 77, maybe they're related lol. Right pointing arrow, no might. Hear me out, what if they are the same person? Right pointing arrow, Tin Foil Hero 77, someone kicked this delusional guy. Talks like those were happening all across the internet wherever the footage had reached. Outside the online storm, though, life continued as usual. Some people were shaken by the violence or impact of the incident, others weren't, and after a raised eyebrow or two, they simply went on with their day. But one thing was certain. This was the day the name Takahashi began spreading. Like, because of Taka, not because the name suddenly got trendy or something. Comma, degree, Kamino's secret bar, hours earlier. Comma, damn it, Shigaraki snarled as he slammed his fist onto the counter. Behind it, Kurogiri continued polishing a glass with calm, mechanical composure. Shigaraki staggered forward, one hand already clawing at his neck. Why? What kind of garbage luck is this? Why does a secret boss show up right when I'm trying to raid the final boss? Tap. Kurogiri set the glass down. Crash. Shigaraki immediately slapped it across the room, sending shards spraying against the wall. Now, calm down, Tamura, a voice echoed from a nearby monitor, audio only, no image. What matters is that you escaped. You live to try again. Master. Shigaraki turned toward the speaker, his rage simmering but not dying out. Oi, Tamura, another voice snapped through the same speaker, sharper, older. Where's my precious Nomu? I don't see it with you. It was defeated, Shigaraki said flatly. By All Might, the first voice asked, almost entertained. No, by one of the brats. He handled everything, the villains, Kurogiri, and the Nomu, all alone. Impossible, the second voice barked. Nomu was designed to beat All Might into the pavement. How could a student defeat it? I don't know, okay. Shigaraki exploded, scratching harder. Some brat just appeared and tore through my entire plan like it was nothing. The Nomu put up a fight, but in the end, it still got wiped. How, Tamura? The first voice asked calmly. Shigaraki clicked his tongue. The kid hit it at first. It did nothing as expected. But then he pulled out some weird, blunt blade and somehow sliced Nomu apart over and over. Regeneration did what it was supposed to until he made fire and electricity appear out of nowhere and burned the healing out completely. Kurogiri spoke up next. Quote, He was surrounded by a crimson energy that behaved similarly to telekinesis. It nullified my quirk entirely, almost like a direct counter. And based on the other abilities he displayed, that energy may be capable of more. A quirk that versatile, the second voice muttered. How did we never hear of him? The first voice, still unfazed by everything, gave a light chuckle. Who knows, Doctor, maybe the association raised him in secret, intending to eventually make him a replacement for All Might. Or maybe he's just some lucky boy with a rare quirk. Either way, I'll ask our little insider to dig up information. A child like that is too interesting to ignore. That reminds me, the doctor said, it is strange that both of our recent operations were ruined by telekinesis-type quirks. And both users seem to wield multiple abilities. You're right, the first voice mused, sounding almost but not completely surprised. I almost forgot what happened to Makia. Well, no harm in being curious. Let's dig into this boy's past, see what sort of creature we're dealing with. What did you say his name was? Shigaraki practically hissed, hatred bleeding into his tone. Takahashi. That's what Eraserhead called him. Takahashi, the first voice repeated, amused. Let's see if his quirk will make a fine addition. Comma. Degree. UA's office, 1 day later. Comma. We've gathered here to discuss yesterday's incident. I apologize for calling everyone in so soon. How are you feeling, Aizawa-kun? Nezu asked, turning toward one side of the table. Aizawa sat there calmly, wrapped in multiple layers of bandages. I'm fine. Recovery girl handled my injuries fairly easily, since there weren't too many. She advised I rest for a while. Efficient as always, Nezu nodded, pleased. Then he turned to the opposite end. And you, All Might, you overworked yourself a bit yesterday during your rush to save the students. All Might, currently in his shrunken form, waved him off with an embarrassed smile. Since I wasn't able to do much, aside from the lingering pain afterward, my muscle form wasn't taxed too heavily. Nezu nodded again. Well then, since everyone seems okay, let's get to the heart of the matter, how this disaster happened in the first place. One teacher raised a hand. It must have stemmed from the press incident last week. They probably used that chaos to slip in and gather whatever information they needed. It also answers who was the one who destroyed our gate. I was thinking the same, Nezu agreed. Though the speed at which they acted is still baffling. Leaving that aside, do we have any information on the two who got away? Aizawa lifted a hand slightly. The police don't have much. However, from the brief exchange I had with the one who seemed to be in charge, Shigaraki was his name, according to Takahashi's testimony, I was able to get a read on him. As a grown adult who still hadn't shed the sense of omnipotence kids have, he behaved like a manchild. Treated the whole attack like a video game, and got easily frustrated when things didn't go his way. As for his quirk, one of his hands touched his elbow, where the villain's quirk hurt him yesterday. It seems to decay whatever his palms touch. However, it appears to require prolonged contact, otherwise, the effect stops spreading. Nezu nodded slowly. For someone like that to gather so many villains, no matter how petty or low level, and to have someone by his side strong enough to allegedly contend with All Might, something doesn't add up. I'd lean towards the possibility of someone behind all this, backing him. Someone powerful. All Might's expression darkened. He had already spoken with Tsukauchi, and based on the Nomu's abnormalities, both had reached the same unsettling conclusion. The possibility that that person was behind this wasn't small. We were incredibly lucky this time, Nezu ultimately said with a sigh. We were taken by surprise, and at a moment when All Might wasn't available. Had Takahashi not been there, I genuinely wonder how things would have turned out. About him, Principal, Aizawa said, his brows furrowing. During the fight, he demonstrated abilities beyond what his quirk should allow. His abnormal power, for what appears to be a relatively normal quirk, was something I overlooked once. There's always the chance a simple quirk hides great potential. But these other abilities are too much to ignore. Do you know anything about it? Aizawa asked. Nezu paused, thinking. Takahashi has indeed informed me of a few changes his quirk has undergone over the past week. Though they most likely span over a few months. That makes it sound like you're acquainted with him, Principal, Aizawa noted, brow arched. Nezu seemed unbothered. Yes, he and I met some time ago. His case was quite unusual, awakening a quirk very late, much like Midoriya in your class. All Might flinched slightly. I took an interest in his situation. After meeting him and seeing his potential, I offered him a spot in the recommendation exam. Funnily enough, he refused and insisted on taking the regular entrance exam. Still, he's someone I have very high hopes for. All Might's sweat dropped. This all sounded fairly similar to his own situation and young Midoriya's. Have a late awakening of their quirk, and then receive the support of a high authority in the world of heroes. There were differences, sure, but both their situations were almost comically mirroring. Was Nezu also raising a future number one in secret? Nezu turned to him with a polite smile, one that somehow said everything and nothing at the same time, before facing Aizawa again. What's even more surprising, the principal continued, is that in the short time he's had his quirk, it's undergone multiple growth spurts through training. And since UA started, he has confided in me about new applications of his quirk, precisely what you witnessed yesterday. Though not the ability to manifest electricity and fire. Nezu thought, his smile stretching a tiny bit as he spoke. But he didn't mention that part. Aizawa nodded, silent for a beat before sighing. I'll need an exact description to know what I'm dealing with. And you should document all this with the Quirk Association before it gets classified as a purposefully misleading quirk. I'll prepare a dossier with everything you need by the end of the day, Nezu replied. As for re-registering his quirk, he and I are handling it. Given the association's limitations on reapplications, we'd prefer to let as many changes manifest as possible before submitting. Aizawa nodded in his usual bored tone. Fair enough. Degree. Takahashi's house. Achu. Taka's head snapped forward as a sneeze escaped him. Wiping under his nose with a finger, he grumbled, damn, someone must be talking about me. A couple of seconds later, he burst out laughing. Of course someone's talking about me. I'm freaking famous. On his screen, a YouTube video replayed the USJ fight, specifically his clash with the Nomu. Below it, the view counter was already sitting in the several hundreds of thousands. Not on the level of his music video, sure, but if you consider the 10 or so re-uploads on other channels, news stations' official accounts, and platforms, the reach was massive. And so was the aura. Status page, filled right pointing small triangle strength, 169 base, 1472. Filled right pointing small triangle defense, 338 base, 1507. Filled right pointing small triangle aura projection, 40,000. Total aura, 42,472. Since last night, just one night after the video went viral, his aura had gone up by roughly 5,000 points. A pretty substantial jump, considering it encompassed at least a month of constant passive earnings in just one night. And this was just the first few hours since it became viral. The gains would probably grow a bit more after this. Taka eyed the numbers with satisfaction. Of course, he doubted the surge of aura would last 2, maybe 3 days more, with each day slowing down, and then the gain would drop hard to its usual rate of around 100-something per day, if maybe a bit bigger. Such was the sad reality of relying on news and whatnot. Music was a steadily growing passive farm of aura, as people would revisit the song and feel awe, even if not as strong as the first time. News, on the other hand, burned bright but died pretty fast. No matter how impressive the video was, eventually it would fade from public memory, right alongside the whole incident, when something else took the spot of the most important news of the day. There were epic battles galore nowadays, although a bit shocking, it was something plenty have seen around. That's just how the world worked, sadly. By his estimates, he'd maybe cap out around 46k or 47k before things slowed down again. Not an enormous increase, but more than enough for what came next. The sports festival. Now that was an aura farming event. If everything he remembered about it held true, this would be the moment to rake it in. The entire country watched it, not just casually, but culturally. It was like the activity to watch that day, no matter the age or place. Kinda like World Cups for football, soccer in Taka's old world. Those disrupted pretty much all activities due to their importance in many countries. And in this case, the sports festival was that. Not to mention that the overseas numbers were nothing to scoff at either. Although he didn't know how effective their influx of aura would be due to the distance, maybe it'd be a step to start earning aura globally. Sure, the third years usually stole more attention overall, but things might be a bit different from previous competitions. After all, this year had Todoroki and Iida, big names, big families, and thus big reputations. Bakugo had a villain incident last year, too, but he doubted it would steal much spotlight. And then, of course, there was him. The USJ video he had his clone take hadn't been only for aura farming, it was bait. A perfect hook to draw eyes toward the first years at the sports festival and make sure his name was fresh in people's minds. Now the stage was set. All he needed was for classes to resume, for Aizawa to make the announcement, and then he could focus on his own performance and that of his class, so everyone could put on the best show they could. So he could shine the brightest and get even stronger. Taka chuckled to himself, smug as ever. Then he flopped onto his bed, hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. There's truly no rest for the aura farmer, he sighed. Honestly, yesterday's fight had drained him of all energy. Good thing UA had cancelled classes for a day after the whole disaster. He was definitely going to catch up on sleep. And it was revealing too, he thought, remembering the instant he clashed directly with the Nomu. In game terms, just how Shigaraki would love to phrase it, the Nomu was like a late-game miniboss dropped into the tutorial area to stomp underleveled protagonists. Still far weaker than the true endgame bosses, but beating it was a solid benchmark of where Taka currently stood, even if he'd had to pull a few hidden cards from up his sleeve to win that fight. He recalled that Nomu was seen as All Might tier by the fans in his old world, but in his opinion, it was just a matter of type advantage, like fire beating water. If someone like Endeavor had shown up, he might have turned Shigaraki's secret weapon to ash in a single blast, cauterizing the regeneration and using a kind of attack the Nomu couldn't absorb. If he managed to do that before he had his face stomped, but never mind that. All Might just struggled because he was a brawler, the literal thing the Nomu countered, and was weakened. Yet, even then, he managed to outspeed and outdamage the quirk zombie, going beyond its absorbing threshold. Without that shock absorption quirk, the Nomu would have probably been dead in just one punch. Regardless, the fight gave Taka a clearer picture of his actual strength. He was nowhere near All Might or All for One, but he was undeniably strong, stronger than something on the level of the Nomu, which already put him leagues above most villains in the near future. On that note, everything ahead seems a bit weak, doesn't it? USJ had been an abnormal event, a ridiculous spike in difficulty that, originally, only All Might could have handled. Well, him too, now. Everything after that was more manageable for the protagonists, not enough to sideline them. Stain. The League's antics. The Shi Hasaikai. The Shi Hasaikai. Taka blinked at that thought, his train of thought derailing completely as his eyes slowly widened, as if someone had thrown over him a bucket of cold water. Not because of overhaul, yes, the guy had a strong quirk, but one utterly countered by telekinesis. Taka could fold him instantly right now. No, what hit him wasn't the villain. It was Eri. His eyebrows drew together slowly as the realization sank in. A wave of guilt hit him. Taka sat up, posture no longer relaxed, staring ahead with a blank yet conflicted look. What the hell have I been doing? He muttered. 12 months. 12 months spent focused entirely on getting famous, getting stronger, farming aura. And not once, not even once, had he thought about Eri's situation. He had completely forgotten about the kid suffering right this second, being experimented on for profit. All he'd cared about were the future arcs and how to milk them for aura as efficiently as possible. Aside from a few deaths later in the timeline, he hadn't even considered altering canon until much later. His brain had just accepted that Eri would have to wait until her arc arrived to be saved. Because that was the efficient way to aura farm, the efficient way of using his knowledge. He hadn't questioned it in the slightest, just accepting it had to be like that, and acting in accordance with it. For 12 months. Shit, Taka whispered, sliding to the edge of the bed, clutching his head with one hand. The excuse of a lack of power was long gone. He had been in the top tiers of the world for a while now, and even if he hadn't, overhaul had only been a problem in the show because the guy had some prep time before the heroes arrived. Without it, even Taka from 3 months ago would have found it easy to deal with him. And yet, he hadn't done so. Not even once did the thought pass through his head. A few seconds passed, silence stretching as Taka's thoughts ran wild. Then, a clone burst from his aura, slowly materializing, until the image of another Taka, serious and no longer carefree as clones tended to be, was standing there. We have 2 or 3 weeks before the sports festival, Taka said to him. The clones stayed silent. Then more clones began materializing one after another, until eventually the room was completely full. Taka looked up, expression steeled. Let's find her within 1. Yes. The clones echoed in unison. Sports festival incoming. The next day, Shaw. The classroom door slid open as usual. It was still early, so only a few students had arrived so far, like Iida, Yaoyorozu, Todoroki, and Midoriya, who were usually the most punctual. Those more energetic, like Kirishima and Bakugo, had already arrived too, along with Jiro, Tsuyu, Shoji, and a handful of others who happened to get here early as well. As the sound of the door opening reached them, those more talkative and bored out of their minds turned to see who it was, hoping they could have someone to talk to while they waited for class to start. Instead, they were in for a surprise. Kirishima's eyes widened like platters at the familiar figure standing calmly in the doorway. Taka, you're early, he asked, eyes blinking repeatedly as if not believing it. For real? Jiro's head snapped toward the door, jaw-dropping. This is unprecedented, Hiro, Suyu added. Taka just stared at them with a deadpan expression. I woke up a bit earlier, he said as he passed by their spots, before then heading straight for his seat. Ah, Kirishima looked like he wanted to talk a bit more, but in Taka's tone, even if barely a shade different, something felt heavier. Like an actual seriousness, unlike what Taka usually showed. And it wasn't just him who noticed. As Taka sat down, even Yaoyorozu hesitated to greet him, letting him simply drop into his seat and cross his arms in silence like always. Midoriya, on the other hand, felt more nervous than usual, feeling the oddness in Taka's attitude. It must be that, right away, many of them connected the shift with yesterday's leaked footage of him fighting the Nomu and the public reaction that came from it. And as they did, the air in the classroom shifted too, with many recalling the graphic images of their seemingly serene classmate fighting the Nomu with brutal precision, slicing through limbs again and again. Back then, at the USJ, the class had been pretty far from the fight. That distance, plus the speed of the battle, and the stress and adrenaline running through their bodies at that moment, had dulled the shock of their classmates' actions severely. But the video that leaked out the other day had no such interferences aside from blurring the most gory images. When they saw it, there was nothing blocking the real ferocity behind that fight anymore. They all knew hero work could get bloody, accidents, villain brutality, life or death battles, it was part of the job. But they were still kids, inexperienced both in battle and in situations like that in general. Seeing their classmate, someone they saw every day, fighting with that level of ferocity was jarring to say the least. Still, none of them felt the right to criticize Taka, nor to judge him. Not when, at the moment of truth, they just stood back, unable to do anything. All while he took care of everything. Even tactically, what he'd done was necessary. The Nomu regenerated, and it absorbed normal impacts like nothing. A more ethical fight, for the sake of protecting their eyes, wouldn't have worked. And yet, no one in there could erase their unease fully. The room fell into an awkward silence, the tension building around the person at the center of it, who kept his eyes closed and waited quietly for class to start. At least, until, Oi, Takahashi, you're not seriously worrying over what those TV guys said, are you? Taka opened one eye and turned. Jiro stood beside his desk, arms crossed and expression wry. People like that love to hear themselves talk, she said. Their opinions aren't worth much. You saved all of us, what's so bad about that? Kirishima snapped out of his daze, leaning forward with renewed energy. Why, don't mind them, bro. You saved our asses back there. That's what really matters, right? If anyone feels something's bad with that, then screw 'em. After a beat of silence, another person joined in. It was scary, but you did what you had to. If you hadn't, who knows what could have happened to us, or the teachers. Suyu added from the other side of the room. A few nods came from some of the students nearby, agreeing with her and joining in to reassure their classmate. Jiro smiled faintly at the support before turning toward Taka again with a triumphant look. The person in question remained silent for a moment, eyes drifting over the three of them and some of the other classmates. They all looked so proud. I appreciate the support, Taka suddenly said, before looking at them with a deadpan, but what are you all talking about? All three blurted out at once. Another wave of awkward silence washed over the room. Wait, didn't you see all that stuff those TV experts said? Kirishima asked, genuinely confused. Taka gave a faint nod. And didn't it bother you? Kirishima prodded. Taka raised an eyebrow, scoffing before relaxing in his seat once more. Fools can talk all they want. It won't change that I will one day stand at the top, whether they like it or not. Kirishima's face scrunched as a single tear left his eyes, fist clenching in excitement. So manly, damn it. At the same time, several of the classmates who had been minding their own business shifted their attention toward Taka, brows tightening as he declared, so casually, that he'd be the number one. Bakugo clicked his tongue. Todoroki shot him an irritated glance. Midoriya shuddered. Others simply sweat dropped at the sheer, unshakable confidence. Still, they couldn't deny the effect it had on them. That level of certainty, shrugging off criticism, glaring at the future head-on, was something they all wished they had. Especially in a field where that kind of mindset wasn't optional. With the air in the classroom lightening upon seeing their classmate remain strong and, confident as always, minutes passed while they waited for homeroom to start. More classmates trickled in, some nearly toppled over at the sight of Taka already in his seat, while others didn't even notice. Eventually, the bell rang, declaring the start of class. And yet, their teacher still hadn't shown up. I wonder who's gonna teach us now, Uraraka murmured. Aizawa-sensei got really hurt the other day. Maybe All Might, Suyu offered, prompting several hopeful nods. What about midnight? Kaminari offered another suggestion with a wide smile. Many of the male students there gave slow, barely detectable nods. The girls, on the other hand, just glared at him with a deadpan expression, causing Kaminari to shrink in his spot. Shaw. Their guesses died immediately when the door slid open. In walked a completely bandaged but familiar figure, voice muffled and flat. Morning, Aizawa-sensei, the class shouted upon seeing their teacher enter in that state. To be wrapped up like a mummy and still show up to teach, just how serious was he about his job? Aizawa's gaze swept over them, lingering on Taka for a second longer, before he stepped fully inside. Are you alright, sensei? Iida asked in alarm. I'm fine, Aizawa said, with the tone of someone ending the topic permanently. His eyes sharpened. Instead of worrying about me, worry about yourselves. The class stiffened. What did we do? Why does he sound mad? Aizawa didn't drag it out. The sports festival is nearing. Exclamation mark quote. The class gasped in shock. It was just a normal school activity. Kirishima and several others trembled with excitement. At least, until Jiro raised her hand. Is it really okay to hold the festival so soon? I mean, villains broke in just a few days ago. She asked, looking unsure about the whole thing. Ojiro, sitting across her, nodded. What if they attack again? Aizawa didn't even blink. UA wants to demonstrate that our crisis response is solid, so security will be increased fivefold compared to past years to make sure nothing happens at all, and besides, the sports festival is far too important to cancel over some measly villains. Everyone gulped. That hadn't felt like some measly villains as he painted it. But deep inside, they couldn't refute his words. No one needed a reminder of what the sports festival meant for UA and the students. As future heroes in training, impressing pro agencies was essential, and this event was the biggest stage they had to do that. Aizawa then proceeded to give them a debrief on the whole event. Date, the number of pro heroes to expect, and some of the organizations that would broadcast the whole thing. Also they could get in their heads just how important the approaching event was. Huffing satisfied once he saw them all looking pretty nervous, he decided to give them a break from the information dump. You only get 3 chances, once each year, to show the pros what you're made of. If you plan to become heroes, then your future starts here. Act rationally, and prepare thoroughly. His gaze flicked to Taka again. I'm repeating it one more time just in case any of you were absent-minded. You have 2 weeks to polish yourselves. If you're rational, make the most of it. That's all. Class dismissed. Aizawa then picked up his things and left, leaving behind a dumbstruck class. Only for that baffled silence to flip into an eruption of excited chatter in the classroom. But as everyone got up to chat about the whole thing, unable to contain their excitement, Taka didn't join in. His eyes stayed fixed on the board, more focused than on any other day. Degree. Lunch period, you guys, I asked Smintas how we're supposed to have time to prepare for the sports festival when we'll be drowning in classes until then, Sato said, lifting a finger factually. Turns out, during hero basic training, they'll let us use the whole hour to train at ground beta. Everyone around the table perked up at that, utensils stopping. That huge fake city? Kaminari asked, raising an eyebrow. Jiro massaged one of her earlobes in thought. I guess quirks will be allowed then. Sato nodded. So, what do you think? Should we step up our training sessions and use our quirks? To his surprise, though, the moment he suggested that, no one looked thrilled. I mean, it sounds exciting, Kirishima admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. But realistically, if Taka uses his quirk, it's gonna be an instant game over. We won't even get to fight back. Jiro nodded flatly. Yeah, plus, we're already pretty solid when it comes to teamwork. The sports festival is mostly solo stuff anyway, so I kinda want to train my quirk on my own. Same, Mina sighed, slumping a little. It'd be fun, but I need to work on other things too. Suddenly, Taka set his utensils down, finally lifting his gaze from the spicy curry he had just finished demolishing. Maybe one-on-one matches would suit you guys better, he suggested calmly. Against you, Jiro deadpanned. Taka shrugged. Against me, against each other. Either works. There's always an event where students get pitted against one another at the festival. That kind of training fits the format. Everyone fell silent, the idea rolling around in their heads. Regardless of their hesitation, Taka stood, picking up his tray. Either way, there's no hero basic training today, so think it over. And with that, he walked off. A quiet moment lingered at the table. He seems a little more talkative today, or am I imagining things? Mina said, scratching her head. No, he definitely spoke more than usual, Kirishima agreed, eyebrow raised as he watched Taka's back disappear around a corner. Jiro let out a light breath. He talks more than he looks like he does. I guess he just opened up a bit today. You and him sure talk a lot, huh? Mina asked, leaning forward with a mischievous grin. What's that supposed to mean? Jiro sputtered. While his friends kept chatting, Taka walked out of the cafeteria, letting the voices fade behind him as he moved down the quiet hallways of UA, giving his thoughts free space to run. 2 weeks, huh? He exhaled slowly. He'd miscalculated by a whole week, thought he had 3, but no, just 2. That significantly cut down the time he had to whip his classmates into shape. And that wasn't counting the other thing occupying his attention right now. It's gonna be a busy couple of weeks, he muttered, brows drawing together. Nothing he couldn't handle, though. At worst, he'd send a clone to school in his stead. He'd prefer not to, though. They behaved rather questionably, and letting them close to his aura farming spot was a big no-no, unless desperate times called for desperate measures. So, with the problem of probably being overwhelmed with things to do in the next couple of weeks resolved, Taka focused on the next problem. How am I supposed to get everyone else to join the training? He sighed again, this one long and drained. He'd barely spoken to most of the class. Naturally, that was coming back to bite him in the ass. Consequences. They are fucking everywhere, he groaned inwardly, massaging his face in exhaustion. A brief silence followed in which Taka mused over the problem, trying to find a way to get everyone to accept becoming his pupils. Maybe I can just get Mina and the others to invite them, surely they can do so, they actually talk to the others, unlike me. He muttered. Worst case, he'd crawl out of his edgy shell and invite people himself. Or send a clone to do so. That seems better, Taka snorted. Click. Just then, as he passed the teacher's lounge, the door slid open, and 2 figures stepped out at the exact moment he walked by. Curious, he turned his head, and froze. And so did the other 2. Why, young Takahashi, good to see you here. T. Takahashi-san. Midoriya and All Might, walking out of a room together, probably having eaten together. Man, these 2 are terrible at hiding their secret. His eyebrow twitched. He stared at them flatly, eyes moving between teacher and student with the driest deadpan imaginable. Still, he resisted the urge to comment on their non-existent acting skills and instead gave them a curt, polite nod. He was fully prepared to move past them, pretend he'd seen nothing, and let them continue failing at subtlety. But just as he took a step, young Takahashi, could you stay for a second? All Might called, making Taka stop mid-stride like someone had pressed pause on him. Midoriya glanced between them, confused and even a little anxious. He stayed there for a bit, apparently thinking this was something he had to hear or something. But with a gentle push from All Might and a forced cough, the kid was dismissed and forced to walk away. To even shoo away your successor. Now, Taka couldn't help but feel genuinely curious. Just what did his future errand boy want with him? Challenge. After Midoriya left, All Might gave Taka a gentle pat on the shoulder and a wry smile. You look a bit weary, young Takahashi. Any lingering issues from your fight at USJ? Do you need recovery girl to take a look? Not really, my schedule just got tighter, that's all. All Might blinked, then his eyebrows shot up. Yes, the sports festival. I was just discussing it with your classmate, young Midoriya. Taka raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. He couldn't remember exactly what this scene had been about in the show, but he was pretty damn sure it hadn't been a casual chat about the upcoming event. Maybe All Might wasn't lying, but he was definitely leaving something out. Not that he cared much. It probably was something along the lines of Midoriya being his successor and having to aim for first place. Normal shonen stuff. Well, since we're on the topic, All Might continued, that's actually why I asked you to stop. There's a favor I'd like to ask of you, young Takahashi. Taka blinked. The All Might, needing something from him. Weird. He had made sure he and all his classmates knew he was hella strong, but All Might wasn't exactly the type to need backup. So what? It's probably more paperwork for the class rep. His face twitched. All Might noticed and sweat dropped. Don't worry, it's not too much, I think. He cleared his throat, shifting into a more serious posture. You're strong, young Takahashi. Perhaps even stronger than I was when I was studying here. That much I know, Taka answered without hesitation. Ahem, anyway, the point is, your strength is exceptional. And not only that, from what I was able to gather since we met, you possess both the experience and instincts to accompany your grand power, making you, not exaggerating, already ahead of many pro heroes. All Might then sighed, his face turning faintly worried. Big-name heroes will almost certainly be fighting over who gets to intern you after the festival. But your classmates, even though they are at a level expected of them at this point, may not be so lucky. Taka's eyes narrowed. He could already see where this was going. The contrast will be too big, he muttered. All Might nodded. That's why I wanted to ask you to help them grow in the time left before the festival. Especially those who are struggling. Taka caught the tone instantly, eyebrow rising. Like Midoriya. A snort escaped Taka before he could stop it. This guy seriously sucks at acting. He forced the laugh back down and managed to recover his poker face, though All Might looked even more helpless than before. I know it's asking a lot, All Might continued, and it's time you could be using to prepare yourself for the sports festival, but... Taka lifted a hand, stopping him. I already plan to. Ooh, really? All Might brightened instantly. Taka nodded. In front of an event this important, as a class representative, isn't it my duty to help my classmates prepare thoroughly so they can achieve their goals? Young Takahashi, All Might looked touched, at least, until Taka spoke again, freezing All Might mid-smile. Don't worry, from what I've seen, Midoriya's control over his quirk is terrible. But while 2 weeks might not be much, by the end of it, I assure you, you'll have a Midoriya who can actually fight like a hero. All Might lifted a hesitant finger. On to your other classmates too, of course. Don't forget about them. Young Midoriya is just one of them. Taka suppressed another snort. Sure. All Might looked dissatisfied with the curt answer as if he hadn't actually managed to clear up the misunderstanding, which, of course, wasn't a misunderstanding at all. But in the end, he simply sighed. Then, I thank you, young Takahashi. Now go, classes are starting soon. Don't let me keep you. Then, see you, All Might. Taka nodded, turned around, and walked off with his usual calm. Though if All Might had been able to see his face, he could have caught the small smirk that took over Taka's lips as he left. He couldn't, though, so he missed it. Only once he disappeared around the corner did All Might finally exhale. That young man is far too perceptive. Degree. Minutes later, after lunch, everyone returned to the classroom, waiting out the last 2 hours of the day. Taka was the last to enter, not by choice, but thanks to All Might's little detour. The moment he sat down, he noticed a certain greenhead sneaking very obvious glances his way. Given that Midoriya sat right in front of him, it wasn't subtle at all. You want something, huh? Yes. Midoriya stammered, already thrown off. What did you and All Might talk about? Taka stared at him. What are you, his jealous girlfriend? After a beat of silence, thinking of something, a faint smile tugged at his lips. Not much, he just said something about making me his next successor. What? Midoriya nearly toppled out of his chair, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. I'm joking. Once again, Midoriya almost fell from his chair. He actually let out a tiny sigh of relief before shooting Taka a wry, tired look. Caught you lacking. Still too green it seems, though, I guess that's your natural color, Taka thought with a snort. He asked me a favor, Taka clarified. Which, actually, involves you. Midoriya was startled. Taka continued regardless. I've noticed your control over your quirk is pretty lacking. Like Aizawa-sensei said last week, it's more a hindrance than help at this point. Beneath his desk, Midoriya's fists clenched in frustration, eyebrows creasing. He didn't like what he was hearing, but he couldn't deny it. It was the truth. As he was now, he couldn't even count on his quirk since it destroyed whatever part of his body he used it on. While powerful, it was a ontimeless card. But what could he do? The output was just too much for his current body to bear. Regardless of his feelings, Taka went to the point. So, how about I help you train during the next 2 weeks until the sports festival? Silence fell upon the two. Actually, Not just the two, the tables around fell into silence as well. It wasn't just Midoriya who looked stunned. Those around looked pretty gobsmacked as well. Which was to be expected. Actually, the classroom wasn't particularly big, and Taka's voice was pretty distinct. Still, he didn't look worried about the fact that others had been overheard, and instead simply glared at Midoriya with a questioning gaze. His eyes seemed to say, "Are you in, or are you chickening out?" Naturally, in front of such a piercing gaze, and the fact that All Might himself seemed to have asked him to do this, Midoriya just couldn't find it in himself to refuse. I don't see a problem with it. Then it's settled. Taka let out a quiet huff along with a nod. We'll go over your quirk when training starts. Okay, fortune smiles on me again, Taka thought, leaning back on his chair. Just when he had been agonizing over how to approach this, All Might arrives and hands Midoriya on a silver platter. Actually, not just Midoriya, but the rest of his classmates as well. He now had a proper justification to force them all into proper training by his hand until the sports festival. He didn't know if his position as class representative had helped All Might make that decision, but if it had, then he was glad he was elected as such. Actually, not that grateful. Just like, 1% grateful, maybe. This didn't offset the pain in the ass that was handling the menial tasks of being a class representative of a class of heroes in training. All the paperwork he had to check and then hand to everyone, the constant pressure of being the one in charge of others, especially those more volatile, like Bakugo or Todoroki, who didn't like making things easy for him. Taka groaned, already fed up with thinking about his responsibilities. Thus, with the matter of putting his classmates through hell so they could become worthy opponents resolved, Taka decided to close his eyes and go for his usual session of meditation until class started. Not knowing what else to do in the meantime. At least, that was the plan, until, train Deku. A very distinctive voice came from 2 seats ahead. Taka cracked one eye open and, as expected from the volume, saw the class hothead glaring back at him. Bakugo. He shot up from his seat and stomped down the aisle toward Taka. I've had it with that high and mighty attitude of yours already. You think you're some kind of hotshot, huh? That you're so superior you can just go around offering training. He stopped beside Taka's row, looming over him. Taka only stared back with a bored expression, which did absolutely nothing to calm the situation. And that silent, shitty attitude, like talking is beneath you. The way you close your damn eyes as if nothing here is worth your time, and worst of all, that look you're giving me right now. His voice sharpened. You think you're better than me, don't you? Kachan, Midoriya tried. Shut up, you extra. This doesn't concern you. Midoriya shrank back instantly. Silence fell for a moment. Neither blinked, neither looked away. Then, GKH, a burst of aura slammed into Bakugo, so fast he couldn't even process it, shoving him back just enough for Taka to have space to stand. Better than you, Taka muttered, eyes narrowing as the two stood face to face. Am I not? A vein throbbed on Bakugo's forehead as he pushed forward again, this time grabbing Taka by the collar. Small explosions popped threateningly from his free hand as a manic grin spread across his face. Maybe we should settle this right here, huh? I'm done waiting for the teachers to give me a proper chance to smash your face into the pavement. What do you mean? Taka replied calmly. There's one right ahead. Bakugo's frown deepened. It took him a second, then it clicked, his angry expression freezing for a moment. The sports festival. Taka didn't look away, if anything, his gaze sharpened into a challenge. If you want to prove you're not a weakling, that's your chance. Bakugo growled. Look at you, trying to weasel out of this, HNGH. Another burst of aura snapped outward, this time wrapping around Bakugo entirely. In an instant, he was shoved downward, forced onto one knee. Shock flickered across his face as he struggled to get back up, muscles straining. Only for him to not budge even a bit. Bakugo's eyes shot up toward Taka with fury, any sort of restraint gone. Yet, as he tried to attack now that Taka had thrown the first blow, he realized the hard truth. His hands, stuck on the floor, couldn't lift an attack, no matter how he struggled. He was utterly paralyzed. In that position, he suddenly saw Taka's eyes land on him, disdain gleaming in them. What's wrong? Did you find something there on the ground? Yubastaard. Bakugo screamed in agony at the humiliation, muscles fighting with all they had to get him back to his feet. Yet, he failed. Takahashi-san, I think that's enough, Midoriya said with panic, eyeing with worry his explosive bully friend. Kirishima also joined to help Bakugo. Why, I think he learned his lesson. Didn't you, Bakugo? He ultimately asked, hoping the explosive would know when to give up. Shut up, he didn't. Seeing his pathetic state and the uncomfortable looks of his classmates, Taka exhaled slowly, then kneeled as well, lowering himself to eye level. You get it by now, don't you? He said softly, staring straight into Bakugo's eyes. Let me go, you piece of. You're not on my level. Exclamation mark. Bakugo's fury faltered. Those words had struck a part of him he had been hiding. He wanted to deny it. His whole life, he had been the prodigy, the untouchable talent destined for the top. Not just because of his quirk, but because he was Bakugo Katsuki. He was amazing at everything he did. Combat instincts, firepower, intelligence, even menial stuff. He was simply a step above the rest, made different from birth. But then, amidst his perfect world, he showed up. He saw Taka's results in the quirk assessment test. He watched him fight Todoroki. He watched him battle the Nomu and real villains on a level completely different from his. And now, being pinned to the floor like a weakling, unable to lift a hand against someone his own age, the realization that he had been suppressing until now crept in, cold and undeniable. He was inferior. Even if every part of him refused to accept it, the reality he had faced since entering UA gave him no room to deny it any longer. Ultimately, he wasn't up to par. No, the thought echoed in his head. His teeth ground together, fury flaring back onto his face, not quite ready to yield just yet. But before he could act on it, "You've got 2 weeks, Taka said as he stood up, gesturing upward with one finger. Bakugo was suddenly pulled to his feet as well, still unable to move even a single muscle, but at least, back on his feet. With them face to face again, Taka let out a faint smile. Stick this in your head. You are not, and never were, the main character. That was just a delusion created by a fortunate environment. He stepped forward, eyes shifting into a deep crimson. You're a weakling. Anger flickered in Bakugo, fighting against the desperation of being unable to move. He wanted to shout, to deny everything, to push back. But he couldn't speak. The sheer pressure Taka emitted, for once, made his fiery spirit settle for once, and listen. And in Taka's voice, he didn't find arrogance, but rather, pure certainty. For Takahashi, he, Katsuki Bakugo, the supposed prodigy he thought he was a complete weakling, despite the combat skills he had shown since the start of the school, despite showing he was clearly better than all the extras in this class, in whatever twisted perception Taka had of the world, he, for some reason, remained a complete weakling. Since UA started, the constant reality checks he experienced had been making the illusion he'd been clinging to crumble. What remained was a hollow shell of confidence propping up the idea of Katsuki Bakugo, the always advancing, always dominant one. But a hollow shell in the end, one that couldn't withstand the certainty and power backing up the claim that Taka had just uttered. So all Bakugo could do was grit his teeth in silence, glaring at Taka with venom mixed with helplessness. Finally, Taka pulled back. The red glow faded from his eyes until they returned to black. But as I said, you have 2 weeks, he said, tone loosening. Whether you become someone noteworthy or stay a weakling, that's on you. Exclamation mark. That single comment snapped Bakugo out of his spiraling. He remained angry, obviously. Yet, as Taka sat down again while he remained stuck in place, something flickered across Bakugo's face. Challenge. His crumbling confidence had been given a chance to prove reality, and the bastard in front of him, that what he had always believed was true. That he was cut above the rest. For once, Bakugo didn't deny what had been obvious for a while now. That Taka was stronger, much stronger, and that he was undeniably a weakling right now. But that didn't mean he had been wrong. 2 weeks, he had been given 2 weeks to show not only this bastard, but to reality itself. That there was no one like Katsuki Bakugo. Alright, a manic grin mixed with pure unrestrained fury passed by Bakugo's face as words were finally able to leave his mouth, his confidence surging. I'll make you understand to put you in your place at your precious sports festival. Taka raised an eyebrow at the shift in attitude from someone who had been looking like he might cry a second ago. But in the end, he shrugged the matter off with a snort. Whatever he was thinking, Taka didn't care. Great. Now sit. Class is about to start. Dismissively, he flicked his hand to the side. In one motion, Bakugo was dropped back into his seat and forced to remain there against his will. And right then, the door opened, and ectoplasm walked in. "Good afternoon, class. Let's pick up where we left off last week." He paused, scanning the room and noting the awkward atmosphere. Did I miss something? Degree. At that moment, somewhere else. A door swung open, and a small figure rushed inside. Gentle, I have urgent news. The sound of a teacup being set down followed. What is it, La Brava? Can't you see it's tea time? Ah, I'm sorry, I've committed a grave mistake. She dropped to her knees, bowing deeply. A low, amused chuckle escaped him. It's quite all right, La Brava. We are human, mistakes are part of us. If this news has you so shaken that you interrupted tea time, then I suppose it must be worth the pause. Go on. La Brava shot upright, practically vibrating. It's our great rival. He's been acting suspiciously since yesterday. Nani, Rakanessus, my greatest rival, has returned to action. And not exactly as Rakanessus. He's still a normal UA student right now. But he's been moving oddly. I think he's preparing for a comeback. Gentle. Silence, heavy and growing thicker by the second, befell the room. Then, is that so? Excellent. This may be our opportunity, La Brava. Our chance to shake the world once and for all. 31 comments 0 vote. Shish. After Bakugo's whole fiasco, the last class of the day continued as normal, just with a heavier air. A declaration of war like that couldn't simply be brushed off. Along the hour, odd glances were thrown Taka and Bakugo's way several times, and one person even shed a few held-back tears after the whole spectacle. Still, even with the awkward mood both culprits had created, class gradually came to an end without issue. When the school bell rang, Ectoplasm dismissed them and declared the school day over before picking his things up and leaving. Immediately, everyone began packing up as well. As the room started to move, a figure approached Taka while he gathered his things. "Man, you really don't know the meaning of moderation, do you?" Jiro said, bag on and arms crossed, her expression deadpan. "Moderation sometimes isn't enough," Taka replied calmly as he continued packing. She didn't know how to respond to that. She could argue that had been straight-up bullying, but from what she knew about Bakugo, maybe moderation actually wasn't enough with him. Still, did you have to say the whole, "What's wrong, did you find something on the ground?" line, she said, mimicking Taka's deep tone. Taka paused mid-book shove. Then, after a brief pause, he nodded. "Like I said, moderation is not enough. Plus, I've been wanting to say that one for a while," he added mentally. Jiro's eyes squinted into narrow, dissatisfied slits. Clearly able to tell there was something not being said, but having no way to prove it. Such were the struggles of not being born with mind-reading powers. Close by, Midoriya slightly tilted his head towards them, wanting to speak up about the whole situation. He was partially the reason it even started, after all. But with Bakugo sitting right in front of him, he held his tongue. Given how he got handled at the start of class, it wouldn't surprise him if he was more volatile than usual. Still, training, he thought, secretly not really, looking at Taka out of the corner of his eye. Did All Might really ask him to help me? Was his performance so far so disappointing that he had to ask a classmate of his to help him? After a moment of gloomy silence, Midoriya shook his head. No, sure, he hadn't been able to do anything during the villain attack, and he was still unable to use his quirk without blowing up a limb, but thinking like that felt too extreme, especially after the talk he and All Might had just had about the. His eyes widened as something clicked. So that's it, it's because of the sports festival. He realized, staring down at his hands. He must have asked Takahashi-san to help me prepare for the festival because of his strength. Once again, he sneakily turned to look at Taka. But even if he is strong, will he even be able to help me? His brows creased dubiously. My problem is that my body can't handle one for all's power output. What can Takahashi-san even do about that? Although their quirks seemed similar, both buffing physical abilities, in reality, they were completely different. From what he'd overheard, Takahashi's physical strength translated into even stronger telekinetic power. He, on the other hand, had to use his strength just to withstand his quirk's output. One needed strength to increase his power. The other needed strength to endure his power. Maybe, In those opposites, All Might had seen something Taka could teach him. Or maybe he'll just teach me to fight. He seemed pretty experienced in his fight against Sato, and that mutant villain, Midoriya mused, recalling Taka's baffling performance, and then realizing his own lack of experience. At their first combat exercise, Sato had also said he had learned a lot from their fight. Both were apparently even staying after class to train along with other classmates, so maybe Taka's training was effective. Maybe I should ask, he thought, preparing to turn to his classmate to ask for more details. But before he could even finish the turn, lots of noise coming from outside the door stopped him. As it did for whatever else everyone was doing. They turned toward the entrance, baffled. To their shock, a crowd had gathered outside, all peeking in with curious looks, like kids at a zoo. What the hell, Kaminari muttered, creeped out by the sudden attention. Uraraka, who had been about to leave, found the doorway completely blocked. What is this? What happened? Others just stared, confused or annoyed. Come on, we can't get out, Kirishima complained. Iida stepped forward. Who are you all? Please stop blocking the entrance. It prevents us from passing. The crowd ignored him, leaving him to clench his fist in frustration. Thankfully, a hand patted his shoulder. Takahashi-san, Iida exclaimed as he turned and saw who it was. Taka stepped forward, walking toward the crowd with a calm stride. It's him, he's the one who fought the villains. He looks kinda intimidating. Isn't he also the one who calmed everyone down when the press invaded? Murmurs erupted the moment he appeared. Through them all, Taka remained completely unbothered. He reached the door and stared the crowd down. You're blocking the exit. Watching is fine, but leave a space so my classmates can leave. The crowd didn't react at first, continuing to look him up and down as if he was a rare creature. Move, .. Only after he repeated himself, this time less gently, did they jump into action, opening a path instantly. Once a proper path had formed, Taka huffed in satisfaction and turned back toward his desk to finish packing. That was the plan, but before he could walk away, a voice rose from within the crowd. I came to see what the famous Class 1A was like, but you seem pretty full of yourself. Don't tell me all of you act like that. Taka turned toward the source, a purple-haired student pushing his way to the front. Instantly, he recognized him, although he had already expected him to be lurking somewhere amidst the crowd. Shinso, the guy with mind control abilities, so long as you answered him, at least. So even though Bakugo wasn't the one who spoke, he still makes his little comments. Well, I guess rage baiting is his biggest advantage. Taka mused, tilting his head slightly. Even if Taka had asked the crowd to move politely, he doubted this guy would have said anything nicer. He had to act like a jerk, just enough for everyone here to get fed up with him, increasing the chances they'd react in answer to his provocations at the sports festival, and hand him the win. I have to say, what a disappointment. Shinso continued, eyeing the whole place as if it were beneath him. You know, there are plenty of us who weren't able to get into the hero course, so we enrolled in other departments. But guess what? The school has given us a chance. Depending on the results of the sports festival, they might consider our transfer into the hero course, while also transferring someone out. Transfer someone out? Inside the classroom, those with less stellar performance repeated worriedly. Taka didn't say anything, he simply stared at Shinso without worry, though he did flick a look to Jiro, who had been one of those who screamed in worry. The purple head snorted at Taka's silence. Anyway, the point of all this is, he pointed straight at Taka. If you get too carried away, I'll sweep your feet out from under you. A declaration of war, if you may. Silence fell as Shinso finished his threat, some inside sweat dropped at his boldness, while others just looked at him boredly. Taka, on the other hand, simply stared quietly, letting the silence stretch out. After enough time passed that it got awkward, Shinso frowned. ... You got anything to say to that? Taka blinked lazily, then lifted a finger to his mouth. He didn't let out a sound, but the meaning was crystal clear. Shish. Shinso's eyes shot wide. What's with that? Rude. He sure is arrogant. The crowd didn't seem to like the gesture much. But that hadn't been meant for them. Finishing his gesture, Taka smirked and then turned around to go back to his things. That small smirk cemented it, shaking Shinso to his core. Does he know? He thought, eyes wide and cold sweat filling his back. While he left Shinso to spiral on his own, and the crowd to continue watching, Taka arrived back at his seat. What was with that shushing gesture? Jiro deadpanned. Taka raised an eyebrow. You asked me for moderation, didn't you? That was your definition of moderation? She asked in disbelief. A beat of silence passed. By the way, you and me are gonna be training during these next 2 weeks too. Taka suddenly pointed out. Another beat of silence followed, one filled with confusion. Then suddenly, Jiro pointed at herself. Me. Taka nodded calmly, already grabbing his backpack and swinging it over one shoulder. I heard that. Transfer someone out. From you earlier. If you're so worried about getting kicked out, I might as well help you. I'm fine, that was, crowd pressure. Taka gave her a deadpan look. Fairly sure there wasn't a prior arrangement to yell at the same time as others. WWE might have, you never know. Quote. Please have mercy. Degree. After classes, skies of the outskirts of Shizuoka. As Taka flew at incredible speed across the orangutan sky, the distant city pulled closer and closer with each second. Yet his mind remained away from it, uncaring of his approaching destination. Aura farming, he mused, recalling his performance today. He'd say he'd done fairly well, his gains were pretty good for a relatively normal day. Bakugo and Shinso had even volunteered to help him, letting him flex plenty once again. Yet for some reason, I'm not feeling it, he thought, brow furrowing slightly. All day, something bothered him. Every time he tried to aura farm, he felt more self-conscious than usual. Ultimately, he powered through it, sure, but the wrongness never left. It must be that, Taka thought, his expression tightening. Ever since yesterday's realization, the idea of aura farming felt off. After all, it was an obsession that had led him to forget a kid who was currently being tortured for profit. Since then, the thought of going on with it as if nothing had happened, and obsessing over it again, bothered him. As did the whole act he'd been putting up since entering UA. He felt like a clown performing for no one while the house burned down. He'd thought about it a lot, and it wasn't just airy. There were countless awful things happening out there, right now. And what was he doing with all the power he had? Playing pretend. He tried ignoring it, telling himself it was just temporary guilt. But despite accepting it logically, the feeling didn't leave. It kept nagging at him, asking what the hell he was doing while a little girl was being cut apart or worse and rebuilt into drugs. Sure, he had sent several of his clones to do the investigation and look for the Hasaikai's whereabouts while he dealt with his responsibilities at school. And even if he had stayed to help with the search, his clones were so many that his addition would be a minimal increase in manpower. Yet, going to school, doing his usual aura farming routine while his clones did all the heavy lifting to find Eri. It only made the feeling worse. Was aura farming really so important that he had to pour his everything into it? Was an aura farmer even supposed to obsess this much with it? Was he really one, or just a clown putting on an act good enough to fool everyone so far? Could he even call what he was now an aura farmer? Quote. Taka fell silent at his own questions, his knuckles whitening as frustration boiled in him, and he imagined beating down Shisaki good when he found his base. He continued like that through the rest of the trip, letting his thoughts run wild as he observed the great view from hundreds of feet in the air, taking deep breaths every now and then. Not long after, he reached his usual landing point. A quick dive later, his feet hit the ground, dust blowing slightly upon his landing. After that, he made the rest of the way on foot. Not toward home, toward his base. The Raka base. He got there quickly. After confirming no one was watching, he flew inside. A minute later, he opened the door to the informatics room. You're back. It was about damn time. A group of clones looked up at him, their expressions matching his seriousness. Taka stepped inside, eyeing them and the large board behind them. It showed a map of Japan, some spots marked with red pins, others blue. One clone sat with a laptop on his lap, typing away with a focused and tired look. Any progress? Taka asked. What do you think? The laptop clone answered without looking up. One clone stepped away from the group and approached him. We said a week, but honestly, so far, it's been hard to find even the slightest clue. They keep everything low-key. No personal info, no slips, nothing. And whatever they do show, it's probably not accessible with our current skills. Taka frowned, falling into deep thought. Should we pry the answers out by hand? Surely there's some villains out there who know where they are. A clone from the back spoke up. If we do that, there's a chance they'll hear something and relocate. I think they mentioned they had multiple hideouts in the show. Right, Taka clicked his tongue. A clone lifted a hand lazily. How about we go pry the answers from Night Eye? Surely that guy knows where they are. He'd been investigating them for a while in the show, right? I'm fairly sure Nezu won't tolerate that much. We'll be already pissing him off by returning his Rockinesses. Let's not add more reasons for him to spill the beans after this, another clone said, deadpan on his face. The clone from earlier shrugged. I didn't say we had to be violent. We can just ask him. The guy can see the future. He should be able to tell we are going to speed blitz through Overhaul's base as soon as we find it. Night Eye, Taka muttered, frown deepening. Didn't Midoriya meet Eri in the same city as that guy? Silence filled the room. Taka frowned, turning to them with a dun gaze. You guys didn't think of that. We were busy checking for information online. One of them retorted. And we only have one laptop. No matter how many we are, the number of laptops won't increase. Some of us even flew to rumored spots we found online across several cities to check them. Taka sighed, massaging his temple. Forget it, that narrows it down, right? We only need to search across the city where Night Eye's agency is located. The clones nodded, albeit, one of them still didn't look sure. I don't quite recall the layout of the house, do any of you? There was silence once again. The clone spoke again. Even if we find it, maybe we'll skim over it. A city is a big place. We just need to find information about it now that we narrowed the area down to one city, Taka said, eyes narrowing. And as someone has already said, we can just ask Night Eye for it. He should know how our involvement will end, given his foresight. But what if he recognizes us as Rockinesses? It won't be long before Nezu gets a wind of it. Taka didn't even flinch at the question. Doesn't matter. We were gonna ignore our deal with him sooner or later. I'm not postponing this for the sake of some stupid plan to Aura Farm anymore. The clone nodded, somewhat wry looking. Another clone spoke again, his tone not so optimistic. What if he doesn't tell us? We're a vigilante, maybe he won't even want to look into our future, or even if he does, maybe he won't even care about what he sees. Then, Taka spoke, but he couldn't answer that instantly, his eyes narrowing at the complications. Ultimately, however, he answered without hesitation. We survey the entire city, no matter how long that takes. A collective nod followed, some wry, others just as determined. There wasn't a single rebuttal. It seemed the time to raid the Hasaikai was approaching. At least, that was the case. Bzzz. Until Taka's phone buzzed. Quote. Frowning, he picked it up, gestured for the clones to shut up for a second, and glanced at the screen. An unknown number. He picked it up without much thought. But as he put the phone up to his ear, well, we meet at last, my greatest rival, Rockinesses. Click. Taka hung up. 31 comments 0 vote. Training start. Who was it? One of the clones asked, raising an eyebrow. Trouble I don't want to deal with right now, Taka declared, already halfway through pocketing his phone. Bzzz. Sadly, Trouble wasn't going to walk away that easily. His clones gave him a weird look, which Taka ignored as he lifted the phone again. Unknown number again. Click. Answering it, he put it to his ear. We meet at last, my greatest rival, Rockinesses. I heard you the first time. Then why did you hang up? Taka winced at the angry yell but ignored it. Who are you? What the hell do you want? I see you've already lost sight of your surroundings. It is I, the rising star, who will one day surpass you in fame and prestige. Quote. Gentle criminal, and La Brava, a tiny voice added in the background. A pause followed as Taka blinked in disbelief. Then he facepalmed. It's that guy. After hearing both names, it didn't take long for memories of their small arc to resurface. And as they did, Taka's finger hesitated over the hang-up button. He really didn't want to deal with this right now. Between Eri and the sports festival, his plate was full enough without adding whatever this guy wanted. But knowing a simple no wouldn't get rid of him, Taka forced his thumb away from the button and let the guy talk first. So, what do you want? As expected from my greatest rival, you don't even hesitate to admit your identity. Very well, we will tell you why we contacted you. The truth is, after your unmatched rise online, something we humbly admit, surpassed ours by a little margin, we considered offering you an alliance so we could attain even further fame together. Great minds think alike. After all, at least that was the plan, until the fateful day you retired to become a UA student. Taka recalled the day he fought Gigantomachia, also the day he ended his illegal activities as Rakanessus. So these two had their sights on me since then. Guess Nezu couldn't erase that trace. I may be a villain, an infamous one at that, but obstructing the newer generations is not something I would do, especially not that of a promising future hero. So after you discarded your past as a vigilante and became a mere student, we decided to focus on our own path and let you live your life away from your criminal days in peace, at least until recently. Taka raised an eyebrow. What had he done too? His gaze turned deadpan as he saw his clones across the room, some standing beside a board filled with possible Hasaikai locations, another sitting alone with a laptop, and the rest gathered around a huge table like they were holding a conference. Don't tell me. We've seen your movements, Rakanessus. We know you're planning something big, and against the Yakuza, of all people. What could have possibly sparked this reinsertion into crime? Does it have something to do with the incident at your school? Were they perhaps the ones behind the attack on UA, and now you are out seeking revenge? Well, why are you so worked up all of a sudden? Ahem, my apologies. The point is, you're coming back, are you not? Quote. Taka didn't know how to answer that. He had hoped to keep this whole operation low profile enough that Nezu wouldn't catch wind of it, but maybe that was asking too much, considering the rat's intelligence. So was this going to be an official return of Rakanessus? Taka's brow furrowed. If it is, what's it to you? And how did you even know what I was doing? Ha ha ha, don't underestimate your greatest rivals, Rakanessus. Labrava here is an expert in this sort of thing. It didn't take her a single second to find out what you were doing. She was. Taka blinked. Hold up, she was. That changed everything. Or, well, not everything. Just one very important thing. Alright, yeah, I'm gonna be raiding the Hasaikai, and probably as Rakanessus again, Taka confessed, eyes narrowing. Again, what's it to you? We want to join you, of course. Aid you in this perilous battle. You want to mooch off me. Ahem, that's a bit of an oversimplification. We wish to aid you in this raid, and boost both our view counts by the thousands once it's all over. You mean your view count? Yes. Seeing Gentle finally be honest, Taka sighed and dragged a hand down one side of his face. Normally, he'd ignore this kind of thing, but, hacking, exactly what we need right now. Taka's eyes glistened as he looked over his clones, and at the almost non-existent progress they had made after an entire day. If he got Labrava on his team, finding the Hasaikai's base without knocking on Night Eye's door might actually become possible. And fast at that. For a moment, Taka fell into deep silence, thinking everything over to make sure he wasn't missing any problem in all of this. He recalled both of their personalities, searched in his mind for their backstories to make sure he wasn't dealing with psychos or anything, and then the role they had played in the later arcs. Until finally, his eyes snapped open, resolute. As much as he didn't want to deal with troublesome guys like them, for once, this whole operation wasn't about what he wanted or not. It was about what he had to do. Alright, let's make a collab, Taka said. What's a collab? Gentle's voice sounded slightly away from the phone, genuinely confused. Labrava's hushed whisper followed, very much audible. It's what a temporary alliance is called online, Gentle. I see. Very well then, let's make that collage. Collab, Gentle, collab. I meant collab. Quote. Taka sweat dropped. Was partnering with these two really going to be okay? Still, this should make everything a whole lot easier, he thought, a small snort curling his mouth upward. Now, his plan would advance by leaps and bounds, not needing to worry so much about not having the means or skills to get the information he wanted. I should learn, though, he mused, clearly not liking having been so helpless earlier. After that, both parties agreed on a meeting time and place for tomorrow, agreeing that just talking this over the phone wasn't ideal. Then, the call ended. Heaving a sigh, Taka stuffed his phone back into his pocket. Then, right away, snap, he snapped his fingers, and following that, all his clones around him began vanishing. He took a deep breath as the influx of information arrived, massaging his temple to dampen the weird feeling a little. Once it was over, he picked up his things and began leaving the base, preparing to finally go back home. As he walked away, however, his eyes glistened with a red light. Now all that rests is training my future opponents. Degree. The next day, at UA. Pipe, After a whole new day of school, filled with regular classes, which Taka navigated with ease using his clone's studying sessions to stay at the top, Hero Basic Training's period finally arrived, and with it, a whole free hour for students to train however they desired arrived too. Right now, Taka and Midoriya were at ground beta, walking side to side, searching for a zone far away from everyone else so their training wouldn't be interrupted. Along the way, not a single word was exchanged by the similarly asocial teenagers. It continued that way until they reached a section of the fake city untouched by the chaos of training, with plenty of buildings around to break. Here should do, Taka muttered before turning to Midoriya. Alright, tell me about your quirk. Quirk. Midoriya flinched immediately. The topic always made him nervous. He was aware he tended to talk too much, and being asked directly about one of his biggest secrets was enough to make him freeze. What if he blurted more than he should? But after a moment of thought, he pushed the anxiety aside. All Might expected the best from him for the upcoming festival. He couldn't pass up a chance to improve just because he was afraid he'd let on more than he should. My quirk, sadly, determination didn't magically make the words come out right. It gives you super strength, Taka offered. Yays, that, it's, pretty explosive strength, and, well, Midoriya's words fell apart again. It damages your body when you use it? Taka asked, looking even more deadpan. That, exactly, why does it feel like I'm the one with one for all here? Taka thought, baffled. In truth, Midoriya just hadn't put much thought so far into what specifics he should give when asked. He just knew the quirk had been officially documented as an enhancer type he had awakened late. He also didn't know much about One for All itself, other than that it was a quirk that could be passed down to other people, and that it was what gave All Might his strength. Is that all? Taka pressed. Well, Midoriya looked at his fist as though replaying every moment he'd used the quirk. I think so. I can reinforce parts of my body and use that strength through them, although, as you said, it damages them. Taka nodded silently, as if thinking deeply. And he was, just not about making a training plan like Midoriya assumed. He was thinking of how to bring up his knowledge from the show without revealing more than he was supposed to know. Still, the quirk wasn't all that complicated, so it didn't take long for him to figure something out. So, seeing that it breaks your body when you use it, it's not strength inherent to your body, but rather raw energy or something else inside you that gives you all that power, but that your body ultimately can't handle, he pointed out. Midoriya nodded, unsure where this was going. Then can't you control the output? Midoriya frowned, as if Taka were speaking another language. Taka simply glared at him impassively. If it's energy, and the current output destroys your body, can't you just lower the output you release so, your body doesn't get destroyed? Midoriya blinked. No, I mean, it shouldn't, maybe. The greenhead stopped talking as he slowly realized that there wasn't any mistake in that logic. So far, he had only been focusing on not breaking his body when using the quirk, but while trying to use it at full capacity, in a way, trying to imitate All Might. Since that was the hero's output, he had unconsciously decided he wouldn't and couldn't try or settle for anything less. Instead of imagining the egg not breaking inside the microwave, maybe I should try to turn down the temperature first. As if attaining enlightenment, Midoriya clenched both fists and entered deep concentration. His face scrunched as he struggled, electricity-like energy sparking around him. Taka simply watched in silence, arms crossed in patient waiting. The greenhead's grind continued for at least 5 minutes, trying, failing, and trying again. Since the energy wasn't being released as Midoriya remained still, he didn't get injured for the times he accidentally used 100%, making the attempt much easier on his part, and on Taka's, who sighed in relief seeing that he wouldn't need to use his healing. Eventually, something changed. Midoriya lifted a fist, his breath getting caught. Despite his hero suit covering it, it emitted raw power. However, way less than in earlier attempts. Midoriya smiled at it, eyes brimming with excitement. He looked at Taka, as if looking for approval. Instead, Taka jerked his head toward the building beside them. Midoriya blinked, then nodded, understanding what he meant. Boom. The next second, he threw a punch. Normally, even at that distance, the building would have collapsed, or at least a large section of it. Such was the power of the 100% smash. Yet once the dust settled, the building stood perfectly intact, making Midoriya gasp in relief and excitement. I did it. His head snapped back to Taka, a wide smile on his face. Taka, however, couldn't truthfully smile back. He massaged his face. "Come on, Taka, he's not dumb, you're just biased because you already knew the steps he took in the show." Even though they were pretty obvious steps. In the end, he opted for giving Midoriya a nod of recognition. "Although it's not your full output, at your current level, even the smallest boost should help a lot in the upcoming festival, considering that without it you'd be pretty much quirkless." Midoriya nodded, excited. He immediately started shadowboxing, using his new control to throw powerful, but not devastating punches. His face full of excitement, albeit getting mixed with the pain of struggle as he tried changing the quirk's power from one fist to another with each jab he threw. And while he did that, Taka noticed a new problem, frowning as he scratched the back of his head with a troubled expression. However, he didn't point it out instantly. Instead, he remained silent, observing Midoriya testing his new unrestricted access to his power like an excited kid, his finger tapping his arm as his eyes squinted in displeasure. "I'd love to tell him what he is missing to speed this up," Taka thought, sighing under his breath. "But I guess there's a reason teachers are always ambiguous as hell. If he doesn't discover it by himself, he won't build up proper confidence." Right now, Midoriya kept pushing the power to singular parts of his body, instead of through all of it for a uniform and complete boost to his movement. If he just handed Midoriya the answers right away, the progress could be fast, sure. But this wasn't just about powering the greenhead up. It was about making him a worthwhile opponent. And for that, the greenhead had to achieve his progress on his own. The most he could do was give him hints and let him figure the rest on his own. "Well, I can give him hints," and Taka uncrossed his arms, his usual poker face being disrupted by the small smirk rising on his face. Single quote. "Pressure him a bit." Midoriya continued shadowboxing, slowly and very pausingly, as he struggled to change the enhancement from one hand to another so quickly. However, his focus was broken when, all of a sudden, a burst of air reached him and shook him a little. He turned slightly, confusion spread across his features as he saw Taka, now surrounded in a crimson aura that flowed calmly like waves of an ocean. "T. Takahashi-san." Taka rolled his neck, loosening his shoulders. "Since you already figured it out, let's spar." Midoriya stepped back. "Hold on, I'm still completely unaccustomed to switching the enhancements this fast, I won't be able to fight back at a." "Then perhaps you." Taka let the word drag as he crouched, aura rippling. Swoosh, and then he reappeared, right in front of Midoriya, fist fully drawn back. "Are missing something." Bam! Unable to block, Midoriya helplessly received the punch, getting launched backward, and rolling while skidding uncontrollably across the floor until he finally slowed down. During those last rolls, he managed to catch himself, glaring back at where Taka had been with a shocked expression. Only, Taka was no longer there. A sharp sound cut through the air at immense speed, forcing Midoriya's eyes to dart around in panic, searching for his unwanted opponent. Sadly, by then it was too late, someone appeared at his side. Bam! A hook connected, sending him tumbling again, this time sideways. Thud! Ack! He crashed into a nearby building, the impact knocking the air out of him and causing a small portion of dust to rise. After a second of confusion, he pushed himself right up again, shaking his head to clear the dizziness. But the moment he looked up, Taka was already rushing him. Midoriya reacted quickly, sending a gust of air at Taka with his newly controlled output, hoping to slow him down. Yet right before it hit, Taka simply shifted course as easily as breathing, bouncing off a nearby wall before closing in again. Bam! Another punch connected, an uppercut, lifting Midoriya off the ground due to the sheer force. Luckily, that upward momentum helped him regain his footing. Right away, Midoriya planted himself, head snapping toward his already moving opponent, who zigzagged left to right like chaos incarnate. "Like that, you won't be up to par, Midoriya. Think." Taka's voice reached him as he blurred around the field, forcing a bead of sweat down the panicked Midoriya's forehead. "What does he mean? What am I missing?" The blur suddenly dashed straight toward him again. Midoriya reacted faster this time, barely. He jumped away from the impact and scrambled upright. "What is it? What is it?" Without looking back, he ran. Not to escape, but to gain distance, a momentary tactical retreat to gather his thoughts. Behind him, emerging from the dust, Taka smirked slightly. "Like that damn monkey says, nothing better than a beating to force knowledge into people." 30 comments 0 vote. Training continues. What does he want me to do? Midoriya scrambled his brain for answers as he ran at full speed, turning corners, diving into alleyways, anything to shake off his pursuer. At one point, he even used his new OFA control to boost his legs, trying to get away faster. Maybe that was the point. No, it wasn't. Taka just kept chasing him down to beat him again. So what was he missing? How did things even come to this? Midoriya wondered, recalling how it all spiraled into this weird situation. After figuring out the lower output trick, Taka had immediately forced him into a spar and, for some reason, hadn't held back at all. At first, Midoriya assumed Taka wanted him to shorten the time it took to focus the quirk into whatever limb he intended to use, so he tried fighting back, pushing his burst of power to arms, then legs, then arms again, whatever was needed to adjust to Taka's speed and actually be able to defend himself. But after failing miserably to keep up, even like that, and getting beaten up a few more times, he finally understood. No matter how much faster he got at switching the power around, he simply wouldn't be able to react to Taka's current speed. He was hopelessly outmatched. For a moment, he wondered if Taka was overestimating him, and that was why he was being so harsh. But he soon realized that wasn't it. He'd seen Taka fight before. If Taka wanted, he could knock him out with one hit. Easily, he was sure of that. Yet instead, Taka struck him repeatedly, but only at a level Midoriya could withstand. He was holding back, while still showing no mercy. Outmatching him completely, while also restraining himself. Why? He said I was missing something, but what in the world is it? Panicked, Midoriya looked behind him, and saw Taka inches away, eyes locked onto his. Exclamation mark quote. Terrified, he made an awkward, almost falling turn and scrambled into a nearby building. Ground Beta was the same place where they'd done combat exercises, which meant the interiors would also have a maze-like layout. If he used it to shake Taka off his trail for a moment, he might get enough breathing room to think. He rushed inside, sprinting up the building, taking random turns through the labyrinth until he felt he was deep enough. Once he reached a part of the building even he couldn't recognize, he collapsed on all fours, panting hard as sweat dripped from his forehead. Wheezing, he forced himself to sit against a metal wall, face scrunching from the strain in his lungs. What is it? What am I missing? The moment he had silence, his mind fired up instantly, running at full speed. What does Takahashi-san want me to achieve here? He's holding back, but still fighting at a level one can't catch up to, nor learn anything from, unless he wants to teach me to take a beating. He glared at his fist, letting a small amount of power flow into it. By holding back his hits, he's making sure I can keep fighting, but if so, what's he trying to accomplish by overwhelming me this much? Is he expecting me to fight back against that? I can't. His technique is superior, and his speed is absurd. Even if I learn to switch enhancements faster than ever, I doubt it would matter against that kind of speed. Frustrated, he clawed at his hair. So what is it? Does he want me to somehow figure out another way to fight at his same level? Impossible. I'm nowhere near that right now. To do that, I'd need to draw out more of my quirk, but that would damage my body and turn me into a liability, which defeats the whole purpose of him teaching me to lower the output in the first place. His eyes widened, just slightly, as an idea clicked. So he wants me to fight with the same percentage of power I can handle right now, but if the way I'm using it isn't working, then, is he telling me to use my power differently? He glared at his hands again, transferring energy into them, only to then move it towards his legs. As he did, a frown took over his face. If channeling power only into the parts he needed wasn't the answer, what else could he do? What would let him fight at Taka's level? Speed. Midoriya blinked. Takahashi-san keeps overwhelming me with speed, yet doesn't seem to be hitting me with much force, so he must want me to be able to respond to that. Switching OFA from his legs to his fists was too slow. Even if he shortened the delay to the minimum, that wouldn't be enough. There would always be a tiny gap where his brain had to process the switch. A tiny gap that, given Taka's speed, would prove fatal. But All Might doesn't seem to need to switch. Wait, he doesn't. That's when it hit him. All Might had the same quirk, yet he never seemed to enhance individual parts, nor to focus on changing the strength from one limb to another. Why? Because All Might never boosted a single limb. The key is to distribute the enhancement over my whole body. Boom. His thought cut off as the wall next to him exploded, a cloud of dust shooting upward. From the dust stepped his classmate, eyes locked on him. Takahashi-san. Midoriya flinched, taking a step back. 2 figured it out. I have to use my quirk over my whole body for a full, constant enhancement. That way, there won't be any gaps where I'm switching power from one limb to another, because there won't be any switches in the first place. Taka gave a calm, slow nod. Quote. Exclamation mark quote. Seeing he hadn't been mistaken, Midoriya began to exhale in relief, thinking that, having realized the key to the problem, the pursuit would end. Sadly, he realized his mistake when he saw Taka already taking his battle stance again. Well, his classmate tilted his head. Do it. Seconds later, explosions echoed through the building, left and right, chasing something through the floors. Some nearby students paused their own training, eyebrows rising at the noise and curiosity. That curiosity got an answer quickly. Boom! A blast tore apart one of the outer walls. From the hole, a green figure stepped out, wide-eyed as he checked his surroundings and then stared down at the drop below. Is that Midoriya? Shiro asked, stunned. Deku. Uraraka's eyebrows shot up. Iida adjusted his glasses. Why was Midoriya that high up? And again, they got their answer fast. Haze jumping. Midoriya suddenly sprinted out of the building and leapt with all his strength. Iida panicked. Midoriya, it's not worth it. He looked ready to run in and catch him. But to everyone's shock, thud, Midoriya landed on the ground 2 floors below without even rolling. Electricity-like energy crackled around him. Then, from the same building, another figure stepped out. Takahashi-san, Iida exclaimed in disbelief. Shiro's sweat dropped slightly at the sight. Right, he said he was gonna be training Midoriya, but what kind of hellish training is that? Back in the conflict zone, Taka floated down from the broken floor, descending toward the recovering Midoriya. Looks like you managed it. Midoriya inhaled sharply, staring at himself with wide, amazed eyes. I did it. He could feel the power flowing evenly now. His speed, reflexes, and strength had all jumped significantly, even though he was only using around 3% of OFA's total output. At last, he had taken a step forward in the path to make All Might proud. With this, his eyes lifted toward Taka, fire igniting in them. The air shifted, and the ground cracked as he kicked off, shooting toward Taka at unprecedented speed, winding up a devastating punch. I can fight. Bam! Sadly, his hype ended the moment a giant crimson hand bitch-slapped him into the ground, embedding him in a sprawled pose. Thus ended Splatdoria, knocked unconscious instantly. Don't get ahead of yourself. Taka squinted before sighing, pointing a hand at him. Healing energy slowly wrapped around Midoriya, invisible, of course. As the energy did its job, though, Taka huffed as his mouth curled slightly upward. One less thing on my Toto list. Degree. Minutes later. Taka was now walking alone through ground beta, admiring the mock city with a look of wonder. Does Nezu pay a ton of money to fix this constantly, or does he slave Smintas away for that? After a moment of thought, and noticing the area had plenty of materials beyond concrete, he concluded that the concrete parts were handled by Smintas, while the rest came from the school's funds. That, or there's one hero for each material here, and the school saves millions in manpower. Snorting at the thought, Taka looked up, kneeled for a moment. Then shot into the sky the next second, landing on a nearby rooftop a moment later. From there, he surveyed the whole area, gathering his thoughts. After Midoriya got beaten into the ground, literally, Taka stayed with him until he woke up. With the healing he'd given him, it didn't take long. But he didn't leave him pristine. He didn't want the greenhead to suspect anything, so he was gonna have to deal with some muscle pain for a while. Then he told Midoriya to work on using his still unnamed, full cowl, more fluidly. Right now, what he needed was to internalize the process and make it instinctual while fighting. The fighting part would come later. For now, he was gonna have the greenhead get accustomed to entering and going from the state. Once he dominated it, he'd be ready for a proper spar. Hopefully, he won't take long. And so, he left the greenhead to his own devices while he headed elsewhere, where he was now. Still, that's one bullshit power, Taka thought, grimacing slightly. He hadn't asked the exact percentage, but judging from the original timeline, Midoriya couldn't be above 5%. Yet that much was enough to give him what Taka estimated as around 1,500 physical stats. Absurd, to say the least. Roughly twice than what he estimated Seiji had, though that was purely physical. The monkey had insane agility, flexibility, whatever powers monkeys had, and was simply better at using his own speed, making him far more of a nightmare. But still, bullshit. He shuddered slightly from thinking just how much more the greenhead would be growing in the following months, once his percentage began reaching bigger numbers, until he ultimately attained the 100%, just like in the... Actually, I don't think he ever reached it properly in the show, he just kinda lost his powers after. Taka blinked slowly. So, if I managed to bring him to his greatest potential, wouldn't it be even more awesome when I beat him? His mouth curved slightly at the idea, a smirk forming. Then dropping. I'm doing it again, he sighed, sitting down on the border of the building ceiling, and letting the air ruffle his hair slightly. The aura farming system. Because of it, his path to be an aura farmer was set, whether he wanted it or not. It was his main source of strength, and the only thing that separated him from the weak quirkless kid he used to be. But perhaps in that desperation or addiction to grow stronger, he may have grown obsessed. Forgetting Eri, occasionally seeing his classmates as a source of aura rather than his friends or acquaintances, and forcing an edgy mask onto himself because that's what he had thought would grant him the most aura. Luckily, he had managed to realize it before he might have fully become a sociopath obsessed with being in the spotlight, no matter the cost. Maybe he was exaggerating a little there. Perhaps he could have noticed his state later. But by then, how many things could he have done but hadn't because they hadn't fit in his perfect scenery to aura farm? What kind of aura farmer do I want to be? Taka thought, staring at the blue sky above. Right now, no matter how much he looked at himself, he was merely a pretender with too much strength. Granted, it was working, given his rising aura numbers. But is that all I want to be? Leaving Rakunesis aside, was the his classmates and whoever else had given him aura points, truly aimed at Takahashi Fukumoto? Or was it aimed at the mask he had built because that's what he had thought would be optimal? And most importantly, did he even want the to go to that mask instead of himself? That brought the question back again. What kind of aura farmer did he want to be? It didn't take him long to reach the answer. One who draws effortlessly, whether consciously or not. Basically, not a mask, not a charade. To be edgy when he felt like it, cocky when he felt like it, and chill when he felt like it, and not when it seemed like the right option. A constant drawer, no matter the state, moment, or atmosphere. An aura farmer, true to himself. Less than ding, greater than, less than new mission, greater than. Having broken out of the illusion of false aura farming, it's time for you to shed that shiny but imperfect shell and become what you were meant to be. The aura farmer, Takahashi Fukumoto. And for that, what better start than to mend the mistake you made? Conditions for completion. Filled right pointing small triangle wipe out the Shihasaikai. Filled right pointing small triangle rescue Eri successfully. Filled right pointing small triangle do it however you please. Reward. Plus 1000 aura, gain the skill, the throne. Taka raised an eyebrow. It's been a while since I got a mission. He had even begun wondering if his system had run out of them. Maybe it was just waiting for me to snap out of it. Taka snorted, a small smile forming on his face. Well, I guess it wouldn't be right to disappoint it. This was something he was going to do regardless of the mission, but if the system wanted to toss in some rewards, then so be it. Though, what the hell do you mean by, do it however you please? Less than it means, show me what you got, aura farmer Takahashi. Greater than. A brief pause followed, then Taka let out a choked snort. That shit is so corny. Ultimately, however, he looked at the screen with a wide smile, his expression more vibrant than it had been in a long while. But sure, I'll give you a performance worthy of being remembered for years to come. Having declared so, he heaved a sigh and stood up for good. Now then, enough self-reflection. Time to get busy again. Following those words, he squinted as he surveyed the entirety of ground beta, at least until he found what he was looking for. Or who? A mile or so away, Jiro was currently sitting on a piece of debris, heaving repeatedly after finishing her normal workout. As for why she was just working out, and not training with her quirk. What am I gonna do? She muttered, rubbing her earlobe while looking at it helplessly. Am I even gonna be able to do anything at the festival? Her current dilemma stemmed from the festival's regulations. No supporting equipment, except for the support course, or really special cases, like Aoyama. That meant she wouldn't be able to use her stereo boots, one of her key pieces of equipment that allowed her to channel her quirk offensively by plugging her earlobes into them and firing a sound wave. But if she wasn't gonna be allowed to use them, where did that leave her? Her quirk without that support gear only really helped with reconnaissance, letting her pick up sound waves more easily when her earlobes were plugged into solid surfaces like the ground or a wall. But offensively, maybe if she stabbed opponents with them, she could transmit sound waves that way. But that'd end pretty gruesomely, probably. Aside from that, at most, her earlobes were just stabby little things. And she doubted their efficiency in that regard. So, no matter how she looked at it, her quirk was gonna be completely useless at the festival. She could only hope the festival events wouldn't require too much combat without her support gear. But even if they didn't, at this rate, I won't have anything to show, she sighed, remembering how important internships were, and how being unable to stand out meant being left behind compared to her classmates. Stupid rules, she groaned. You sound troubled. A voice coming from behind startled her. Slowly, with a completely done expression, she turned. Only to see Taka floating behind her, upside down, his face leveled with hers. Boo. Gya, 22 comments 0 vote. Mission on the move. Afternoon came, and both Taka and Jiro walked side by side, one of them slouching forward with an extremely tired face. You can already guess who. Damn it, Takahashi. Taka tilted his head lazily toward her. What? She snapped. What do you mean what? You forced me to pierce solid concrete with my earlobes about 100 times. That's what. So, you even dare ask? He gave her a flat look. It doesn't hurt much, does it? Quote. For some reason it doesn't. She grabbed her head in frustration before snapping again. But that's not the point. Taka didn't answer, just stared with an unimpressed look. You didn't even explain anything. Why did you make me do it? You're not seriously expecting me to use my earlobes as 5cm knives during the sports festival, are you? Depends. She sent him a long, incredulous glare. On what? On what you'll be stabbing, Taka clarified. You can stab people if you want, but that's not why I'm making you do that. Then, Taka's hand moved to poke her temple. Think about it while we finish training your quirk. Just know it's to cover what you were complaining about earlier. As her head was helplessly tapped a few times, a vein popped on Jiro's forehead, before she batted his hand away, annoyed. With that, Taka stuffed his hands in his pockets again, all while Jiro went back to musing over his words. Something I was complaining about, she muttered, trying to recall. The only thing she remembered saying was how unsure she felt about her future performance at the festival without her support gear giving her an offensive edge. But what did using her earlobes like nails against hard concrete have to do with that? The only conclusion she could reach was that Taka was preparing her to use them as little knives. Actually, that's kind of cool. She sweat dropped, imagining herself unleashing a barrage of piercing attacks with her earlobes before standing with her arms crossed as her enemy collapsed dramatically to the ground. Arg, this guy's antics are rubbing off on me. Jiro snapped out of her fantasy, scratching her hair in frustration. Taka only rolled his eyes at her and looked forward again. There shouldn't be a problem with speeding this up, probably, he mused, remembering the training all his classmates were supposed to get at the training camp after this semester ended, and the ultimate move training that followed in the show a few chapters after said camp. Jiro's ultimate move, in particular, involved stabbing her earlobes into the ground and sending sound through it to cause an earthquake-like effect. He could have made her try that right away, but recalling the quirk improvement training she went through at the camp, relentlessly stabbing a mountain wall with her earlobes, he decided otherwise. Since he had no idea whether that specific training was necessary for her to reach her ultimate move, he decided to make her replicate it. This time, stabbing buildings instead of a mountain. All while, of course, healing her constantly so she wouldn't get too injured from the brutal exercise, and just slowly enough that she wouldn't realize she was being healed. He wasn't sure if his healing was gonna speed up the training results, or if they were actually going to neutralize whatever gain there was. He hadn't had time to check whether his healing skill worked as a natural healer or if it just returned the body to an uninjured state, basically making all the point of training useless. But this was the perfect chance to check. Still, he was pretty sure that at some point during the past months, he had used the healing skill on himself after training with Seiji, and his stats had increased without problem. He usually just didn't pay much mind to his gains from training. He just trained out of habit. So Jiro's efforts today shouldn't be wasted, probably. Actually, if my healing speeds up the healing process, why don't I use the healing for training myself? With constant healing, I can probably speed up my strength growth. Taka blinked dumbfoundedly, wondering how it had taken him this long to reach that conclusion. He had assumed he was already hitting his body's limit, given how his stat gains had slowed to a crawl a while ago, so he hadn't considered training as a real path for further growth. But now that it crossed his mind, maybe he'd give it a try later when he got home. By the way, Jiro's voice snapped him out of his self-improvement scheming. He glanced at her, only to see her giving him a sweat-dropped stare. Quote. Why are you helping me with the training? Don't you have training of your own to do for the sports festival? Taka raised an eyebrow, then slowly turned forward again, thinking it over. He hummed quietly for a few seconds, like he was digging for the real answer somewhere deep inside. Then, once he seemed to find it, he opened his mouth. All might ask me to help you guys prepare. So that's one reason, but if I'm being honest, it's because I want to see you at your full potential. Jiro blinked and came to a stop. Taka stopped as well, turning to her with a slight smile. You've got a pretty good quirk and a good head on your shoulders, so it'd be a shame if you wasted the opportunity, plus, you're my friend. Jiro blinked again, still processing his answer. Taka continued anyway. Quote. And besides, being the only one strong is kind of boring. I wouldn't mind some competition. A few moments of quiet passed, during which the two just stared at each other. Then Jiro looked away, suddenly looking a little flustered. Quote. What's with that? Are you dumb? Then she punched his arm. Only to immediately hiss, before grabbing her hand with a pained look. Why are you so tough? My bad. Rubbing her fist, she sighed and lowered her hand. Still, after a bit, a small smile tugged at her lips. The walk stayed quiet for a few minutes, with both simply going over their own thoughts and observing the scenery of the descending sun in the distance. It wasn't until she suddenly seemed to remember something and snapped her head toward him that the silence between the two broke. By the way, Takahashi. With everything that happened, I forgot to ask, but, her gaze sharpened, drilling straight into him. What were those abilities back then when you fought that mutant villain? Quote. A brief silence followed again, a slightly uncomfortable one. Taka almost shuddered from her piercing gaze, but managed to keep himself steady and follow the script he'd prepared. So, after clearing his throat, he spoke. You mean the cutting and generating fire and electricity? Jiro nodded. Taka nodded back, speaking from then on as if what he was explaining was but obvious. The cutting is a new application I figured out for my telekinesis. By focusing all the telekinetic force into a really sharp point around an object, I can increase the sharpness and cut things with it as if I had an enormous knife surrounding it. Jiro tilted her head, her brows furrowing as she struggled to decide whether that made sense or not. Taka's eyes glinted with satisfaction upon seeing that reaction, so he immediately continued with the explanation to not give her any more time to think about it. As for the fire and electricity, that's just a different application. By using my telekinesis, I can accelerate particles and raise the temperature enough to create fire. As for the electricity, that one leans more to using polar telekinetic outputs to generate static, very, complicated stuff. Jiro's expression tightened as she nodded, looking like she was still trying to piece it together. After a bit more, however, she gave a more decisive nod, followed by what seemed like a reluctant sigh of giving up on trying to understand the logic behind something as bizarre as telekinesis. If that's how it is, I suppose it makes sense. Phew. Her head snapped to him once she heard a seemingly relieved sigh come from his direction. Only to find Taka staring ahead with a stoic face. After some more seconds of staring at him suspiciously, waiting for a slip-up of some kind, she shrugged and turned forward again. Must have been the wind. Phew. Another sigh came, this time mental, though. So Jiro didn't hear a thing. A few minutes later, with Jiro still trying to guess the purpose behind her new imposed training, and Taka being as ambiguous with his words as always, they ended up splitting ways when she headed down into the subway, and Taka bid her farewell. After that, Taka walked off on his own. But he didn't go straight home. Instead, he stepped into an alleyway, pulled out a black fabric mask from his backpack, put it on, then shrugged off his upper uniform and swapped it for a hoodie that he had also been carrying. In one moment, he had changed from Takahashi to the infamous Rakunesis. This costume is pretty damn simple, he thought, pulling on the fabric of his hoodie and looking at it with an exasperated look. It had been a long time since he had put on his vigilante costume. Now he realized just how boring it was. But maybe there was charm in that. Still, I should change it, like this, I'm just a hooded guy with awesome powers. Having made that decision for the future Taka to follow it someday, Taka began floating upward, slowly, as he searched for something on his phone. Once he was done tapping and scrolling, he stuffed his phone back into his pockets, and by then, he was already floating high above the ceilings of most buildings around him. Some people lounging there, or hanging their clothes, shot him incredulous looks. But he wasn't there to satisfy their curiosity. Swoosh. Without letting anyone shout or say something, he shot forward like a bullet, aura cutting the air around him to reduce drag and noise as much as possible to not alert the people going on with their lives across the city, or any heroes. Before long, he reached his destination, the ceiling of one of the tallest buildings in the city. He approached it with both hands stuffed in his hoodie pockets. And up there, cape fluttering wildly in the wind, sun shining dramatically behind him, stood Gentle Criminal, carefully serving himself tea on a little plate and cup as he locked eyes with the arriving Taka, all while beside him stood La Brava, looking pretty excited. Taka raised an eyebrow at the sight. That's pretty or a tea, never mind. His inner praise died instantly as a strong gust of wind blew the falling stream of tea sideways, and splashed it right onto Gentle's face. Closing his eyes and resisting the urge to sigh, Taka slowly descended onto the rooftop. Gentle was already wiping himself down with a rug La Brava had clearly prepared beforehand. By the time Taka approached, he was mostly clean again. So, Gentle spread his arms wide, grandly and welcomingly. Well, at last, the two greatest criminal minds of the internet meet to join forces. We are making history here, Rockinesis. History that will mark the world forever, etching our names into the minds of people for millennia to come. You're so cool, Gentle. Taka didn't bother reacting to the theatrics. He still wasn't convinced that teaming up with them was a good idea. So he cut straight to the point. On the phone, you said you wanted to join me in my raid against the Hasaikai, but do you even know why I'm doing it in the first place? Gentle's exaggerated aura faltered as he realized the mood wasn't one for speeches. He took a sip of what little tea had actually made it into the cup and answered more sincerely. We assumed they were behind the attack on your school, thus, making them a target for revenge. Is it that, perhaps? Is this the retribution for their transgress? No, Taka cut him off mid-sentence, and the villain's eyebrow rose in confusion. It's to rescue a kid being subjected to human experiments because of her quirk, Taka said flatly, as if explaining something obvious. Everything I'm doing is to rescue her. Both villains flinched at the explanation, and for the first time, they really looked at him, saw the anger simmering behind his eyes. The complete destruction of the Shi-Hasaikai, the ravaging of their base, the crushing of their members, and the humiliation of the Shi-Hasaikai's leader, Chisaki. Taka raised a fist, clenching it as raw crimson aura leaked from him like violent flame. It will all just be part of the process. Quote. Both villains instinctively stepped back as the air grew heavier around them. But after a few seconds, the pressure eased just enough for them to breathe and focus again. Taka let them settle, then stared straight at them, unblinking. Knowing that, can you, as villains, truly tell me again that you'll help me in this operation? Quote. As the question landed, Gentle opened his mouth to speak, but after a second, he closed it again. La Brava looked between her partner and Taka, confused by the change in moods. But then, a low chuckle escaped Gentle. Quote. A fearsome rival you are indeed, Rockinesis. La Brava has already briefed me on the Yakuza's business. To destroy such a massive, growing drug empire, filled with plenty of extraordinarily strong individuals, all just to save one kid, very gentlemanly indeed. He took the last sip of what remained in the cup, handed both cup and plate to La Brava, and focused on Taka once more. Although I call myself a villain, my motto is to punish all that is not gentlemanly. If the Shi-Hasaikai is indeed using a little girl to fuel their drug empire, then I am obligated to intervene. He pointed at Taka dramatically. So yes, Rockinesis, we will aid you in this rescue, even though we may be villains. Quote. Taka simply stared at him. After enough silence passed, he snorted. All right. He pulled 2 sheets of paper from his backpack, sending them floating toward the pair. There's all the information I've gathered so far. On the papers were details even La Brava hadn't uncovered, notes on hidden, dangerous members of the organization that weren't available to find through digital sources and their quirk, a rough location of their main base, and lastly, a description of Chisaki's and the girl's quirk. All coming straight from Taka's otherworldly memories as a source, something, of course, they had no way of knowing. Both villains grew noticeably tense. Upon reading all its contents, the danger level of their target felt far more real now. To be able to destroy people and then rearrange them with just a mere thought, that was enough to make them understand the sheer danger that Shizaki posed. After giving them enough time to digest everything, Taka spoke again. Unfortunately, while I have a rough guess, I still haven't pinpointed their exact location. You said your partner is skilled at gathering information, right? Gentle looked at Labrava, nodding proudly yet confusedly over the subject. Yes, Labrava has immense expertise regarding digital stuff. Hearing that, Labrava lifted her chin proudly and nodded. I'm a pretty skilled hacker. Self-taught at that. Taka nodded. Her words might have inspired distrust in anyone else, given the rather untrustworthy extent to which the skills of someone self-taught could usually reach. But he knew just how skilled she actually was. Then, please find their exact location. She skimmed the papers again and nodded with a bright smile. Using all this that you gave me, I'll have their location in no time. Taka nodded with a grateful look, before narrowing his eyes. Once you do, we will start with the raid right away. Then, he began floating up. You already have my number. Contact me if you need anything. I'll be going now. Gentle panicked slightly and stepped forward. Hold on, Rakanessus, given the strength of our opponent, won't we need a plan? Taka sent him a calm, collected look. Plans are for when your opponent has some kind of advantage that might inconvenience you. He let the meaning settle. In this case, they don't. With that as his final word, Taka shot upward, sending a gust strong enough to force both villains back a step. As they watched his figure shrink into the distance, Gentle stroked his mustache thoughtfully. It seems we've gotten ourselves into something troublesome, Labrava. Will we be able to fight against such a force with just the three of us, Gentle? Gentle paused, recalling the footage from days ago, Rakanessus, or rather Taka, fighting at a level far beyond what he had ever previously shown against the mutant villain. If he fought the Hasaikai like that, we will be fine, Labrava. Still, it seems we misjudged Rakanessus's personality. Why? Gentle smiled, shaking his head. We assumed he was aiming for the Hasaikai for many reasons: popularity, retaliation, a show of power, but saving a girl. That possibility never even crossed our minds. Looking back at our first conversation with him, it seems he wasn't even planning to return as Rakanessus for it. Labrava tilted her head. Did we do something unnecessary, then? He asked for our help, didn't he? If he did, then perhaps not. With that, he turned from the distant sky where Taka had vanished, whipping his cape back dramatically. Let us go, Labrava. We have work to do. Yes, Gentle. Like that, the ceiling of the building was left empty. And like that, the countdown to the Hasaikai's end began. 24 hours remaining. 34 comments 0 vote. Rakanessus. The next day, at ground beta. Basking in the sun while lying on top of a building, Taka calmly bobbed his head to a melody in his head with his eyes closed, seemingly enjoying the moment. Which contrasted highly with the explosions and the roars of fired-up students all around, training for one of the most important events in their lives. They sure are noisy, Taka muttered, opening an eye for a second before closing it again and going back to listening to music. His my-theme skill sure came in handy at times like this, allowing him to play music in his own head, without the need for headphones. He continued lounging there for a while more, simply letting time go by until bzzz. His phone buzzed inside his pocket. Raising an eyebrow, he grabbed his phone and checked the screen. He had received a message. Without much thought, he unlocked it and then opened the app to check on it. The instant he did, however, he pushed himself up and sat properly while his eyes remained stuck on the phone. After a bit, he opened the Maps app and began typing in specific coordinates into the search bar. Soon, the map changed to show a specific location on screen, making Taka narrow his eyes dangerously. So that's where it was, huh? He muttered. The Hasaikai location had finally been delivered. His fingers moved to zoom out, expanding the map area visible. Then, his eyes settled on a certain point, making him heave a sigh. Not that far, but not quite that close either. It turned out to be around 4 to 6 kilometers from Night Eye's agency, camouflaged with its environment and surrounded by several other Rick-style houses. Following that reasoning, Taka began moving the map, seemingly searching for something across the city. If Night Eye's agency is there, he muttered, tone growing serious. According to what Seiji once taught me, taking the populace of that zone into account, and the few heroes I remember being part of the agency, the patrol range must be of a radius of at most 3 kilometers, which makes the point where Eri met Midoriya, at most, here. He dragged the map to a point right between the Shihasaikai and Night Eye's agency, about 2 or 3 entire kilometers away from the criminal household, and another 3 from the hero agency. For a kid like her to have gotten that far, she must have been running for a while, diving into alleyways on the way and who knows what else just to get away. She must have been desperate, Taka thought, stuffing his phone back with a frown. He ended up letting out a long huff so he wouldn't pop a vein in anger. But even then, the anger didn't really diminish. I could end it right now, he thought, fingers tapping the floor impatiently. Now that he had their location, he could just go and put an end to it. It wouldn't take more than an hour at most, maybe a bit more. Ditch school, fly there at full speed, crash down like a meteor, and start ravaging everything without mercy, giving Chisaki no way of escape. In the show, Chisaki had become such a problem because the police gave him prep time. Enough to buff his men with trigger, plan a distraction, fuse with his subordinates, and then become a monstrosity capable of almost contending with a 100% Midoriya. Almost. He still got beaten quickly, but the fact he endured at all spoke for itself. But an unprepared Chisaki, without all that trigger on him or on his subordinates, while dangerous because of his practically unstable quirk, in front of Taka, who could attack from afar, was a mere ant. A battle with him would not even last a second before Taka knocked him out easily. And all he had to do, right now, was fly over there. But I must not, he thought with a grim face. While there was a high chance it would work given his overwhelming abilities, attacking in the daytime while Chisaki was awake left too many variables. There was always the risk of him slipping away somehow, or, in the worst case, reaching Eri before Taka did and using her as a hostage. Which, considering his quirk, he absolutely would do. Killing her meant nothing to him, he could reconstruct her afterward, so Taka would have to comply with whatever the guy wanted if he wanted Eri to be brought back. At night, however, he, or at least most of his people, would be taken by surprise more easily. Eri would probably be in her room rather than somewhere random in the maze that was the Yakuza base, making her easier to extract. And lastly, he, Gentle, and La Brava would have enough time to make all necessary preparations. Preparations to make sure the Shihasaikai ended today, no matter how much they struggled. Sighing, Taka stood up and walked to the edge of the building, sitting on the border and letting his legs dangle. From up there, he watched without much thought as his classmates hurled themselves into harsh training without hesitation, letting his mind drift. Now that I think about it, what will I do after this? He was going to save Eri, that much was already set. But after that, he was a teenager. The only kids under his care ended up on tissues every now and then. So he definitely couldn't just announce to the world, hey, I'm adopting her now, and get it to accept. Seiji, though, hey. His mouth curled slightly at the idea. Yeah, that guy was getting too old to be dating. Another kid under his care would snap him out of it. He obviously wasn't envious or anything. Yarg. Damn it, still not. Suddenly, 2 voices from below snapped him out of his thoughts. He looked down, only to see 2 familiar figures, Midoriya and Jiro, standing at different points, throwing themselves into the training he'd assigned. Jiro continued stabbing a building with her earlobes in relentless fury, while Midoriya attempted to control his movements in full cowl, which he had already named as such. Both had been at it since class started. They sure are going at it, Taka snorted. I suppose I could use a distraction. With that thought, he stood up and jumped off the building, descending upon his victims. Deep inside, though, he was counting the hours. Degree. Evening, Taka's home, the door opened, and Taka stepped inside with the same poker face as always. Seiji, sitting on the couch watching TV, glanced over. How's your training for the sports festival going? Taka didn't even blink. Training? I don't need no training. Seiji snorted. My, look at little Taka, so smug now that he's gotten a bit strong. Should I remind him why I'm the master, and he's still only the student? Taka shot him a deadpan look. The student has beaten you plenty of times already. Why do you act like you've got an edge over me? Beaten me, please, Taka, you barely survived tutorial mode. I let you win all those times so you could build a little confidence in yourself, but I might have overdone it. You're earning yourself some character development. Taka rolled his eyes, adjusted his backpack, and started toward his room. Come at me whenever you feel like it. Seiji shook his head with an exasperated sigh and turned back to the TV. At least until, hey, Seiji, Taka's call snapped him out of it. What is it? Seiji tilted his head back, resting it against the couch to glance at Taka behind him. Taka didn't reply right away, seeming to hesitate for a second. Ultimately, however, he broke through it. Would you say taking care of me is too much work? Seiji raised an eyebrow and turned on the couch properly to face him. Besides the pain in the ass that is your personality? Not really. Your guardian here is pretty famous. Kid, I make good enough money to sustain both of us just fine. I see, Taka nodded seriously. Then I suppose it wouldn't be much of a problem if you started taking care of another kid. No, I don't think, Seiji started, then froze. His eyebrow twitched. Oi, Taka, while I'm proud you're that advanced in whatever relationship you're in, what did I say about using not protection? We had the talk plenty of times. Don't tell me you went in. Don't be a dumbass. Taka cut him off before he could derail further. I'm talking about adopting another kid. Hearing that, Seiji felt relieved, until he didn't anymore. Why the heck are you asking me this? He asked, already sweating cold. Taka averted his eyes, speaking casually. Nothing important. I was just planning on rescuing a kid being used for human experiments by breaking into a criminal group and decimating them. So I figured it'd be convenient to leave all the complicated adoption stuff of said kid to you. Seiji shot to his feet instantly, panicked and drenched in sweat. Oi, Takahashi, I know I said it wouldn't be much of a problem, but slow down. Also, what do you mean you're going to decimate a criminal group? Didn't you promise Nezu you wouldn't get involved in vigilantism again? A beat of silence. Then Taka shrugged. No, Takahashi, you're not doing that. Seiji was already halfway to shouting, gripping Taka's shoulders firmly and shaking him violently. There's a reason people like me have this job, and why the police exist. All you need to do is tell them, and they'll handle it. He sucked in a shaky breath, panic rising fast. So no, you're not doing that. I'll think about the adoption thing, but first you need to give it time. I think I've given it enough time. Taka interrupted, then lifted a hand to pat Seiji's shoulder. Besides, while I'd love to heed your advice, the truth is, I'm already there. Huh, another beat of silence. You're a clone, Seiji asked, baffled. My bad. Taka stuck his tongue out whimsically. Seiji's gaze turned desperate. Quote. Please, Taka, think, what will Nezu say? There's no way that Super Rat won't know it's you. I've already resigned myself to living as an outlaw if necessary. So. He patted Seiji's shoulder once more. I'm leaving the rest to you. Takahashi. Seiji's long, dreadful scream faded as the Taka in front of him began to disintegrate with a smile on his face. Soon, Seiji found himself grasping empty air. And then, the backpack that had been on the clone's shoulders, hit the floor. Thud. Quote. Why did I think it was a good idea to take that kid under my care? Comma. Degree. At that moment, somewhere else. Comma. So this is the Shi Hasaikai. They have good taste in decorations, Gentle said, standing at the edge of a building with his arms crossed, cape fluttering in the wind as he eyed the traditional, lavish estate across the street. Beside him, La Brava stood in a similar pose, observing the property below. She turned to him. Is this really all right, Gentle? We barely had time to prepare anything besides getting some extra info. He let out a gentle laugh. It's fine, La Brava. We must trust our partner here. He then turned toward the figure beside her. As our gift to your satisfaction. Quote. Taka stood there in the same dramatic pose as the other two, arms crossed and eyeing the building below, except now he wasn't wearing his usual black hoodie and mask. Instead, he sported a long, flowing black coat, a more refined mask, and a stylish hood. His outfit now made him look far more like a proper underground antihero than some edgy street kid. That, and the full moon in the sky shining upon him also added some mysticism. Just when I was moving away from being edgy, he sweat dropped behind the mask, deadpanning. Not that he'd ever admit he felt pretty cool right now. I really need to update my hero costume. Too much edginess from both looks might start giving me away, assuming I even make it past the consequences of today. This might be the day the most talented student in UA becomes a wanted criminal. Shaking the thought aside, he gave Gentle a faint nod. It's acceptable. Gentle smiled, then looked back toward the Hasaikai compound. Well, then, shall we begin? Taka reached into his coat and pulled out a camera. With a small wave, he tossed it upward. The device immediately floated into position, its lens locking onto the three of them. Then his voice echoed, "Let's dance." To be continued.